Story 1.
My wife cheated, and the consequences were devastating. A journey through betrayal and tragedy. The dull thud of dirt hitting the coffin echoed on the gloomy day. I stood there, observing as the minister uttered consoling words for those mourning. My daughter clutched my hand, her husband standing just behind us, offering support with his hand on my shoulder. Beside me stood my son and his girlfriend. At 49 years old, I never expected to be standing graveside, burying my wife. I always believed, deep down, I would be the first to go. I thought that due to my work and the way I had lived my life, I would surely die before my wife, and that when I did, I'd be an old man. Now I felt old ancient. After the funeral, there was the reception. Everyone coming up to me, telling me how sorry they were, how great she was, how wonderful we were, how young she was, everything but what I needed to hear. We've been married over 20 years, 2 kids, both now off on their own. The youngest, Arno, my daughter, is married and about to have my first grandchild. The oldest, my son, is working in New York City in the financial district. Both are doing well. With all the people at our house, he guess it's my house now. See, I'm having a hard time adjusting to this being single. Everything for the last 20 years has been ours, not mine. Anyway, about 40 people were around, talking and offering their support. I just wanted to be alone. At the moment, feeling quite fed up, I finally slipped out into the backyard and worked my way out the back gate, intending to take a short walk. As I closed the gate, someone drove up the alley and parked their car right next to where I was standing. How was I holding up? It was Marie, my wife's younger sister, the one person in the world I didn't want to see at the moment. It was partially Marie's fault that my loving wife was no longer here. If Marie had kept her interest to herself, Brenda would still be with me. I informed her that I was going for a walk, mentioning that everyone was inside and she had been talked about. I didn't smile, nor did I openly invite her. I just stated the facts as I saw them. I now wanted to be away from here for certain, and I was sure Marie would try to invite herself on my walk. I should have known better, as she just brushed past me and went into the backyard. She had always been all about Marie. That's why, when Marie had taken a sudden interest in Brenda's personal life, I became suspicious. That was out of character for her younger sister in many ways. I sighed, glad to be free of her for the moment. There was a cloud hanging between us and a chasm that, to me, seemed insurmountable. Now family, or no, Marie was persona non grata around me. It's a long story about what happened and how it all mushroomed into the funeral today. Life goes on, just like water in a river, always moving relentlessly onward. Okay, here's my story. This is the account of what unfolded in my life. Brenda and I crossed paths after college at her workplace, an insurance company where I went to renew my house and car policies, and she happened to be my assigned agent. Following our initial meeting, I found myself finding reasons to return, eventually summoning the courage to ask her out. After a few months of dating, we realized our deep love for each other and decided to get married. We had 2 children, and our marriage was full and wonderful up until 2 years ago. I never doubted my decision to marry Brenda. We were like 2 peas in a pod, incredibly compatible. Then, Marie became intrigued by Brenda's life. I believe her intentions were well-meaning, thinking Brenda needed to expand and grow as a person, striving to be better and more loving. You could see in Marie that she had been trying hard to assist Brenda with what she perceived as shortcomings. It all began with Wednesday night outings, expanding to include Fridays. As Vince noted, after a while, Marie started spending more time with Brenda than I did, taking advantage of Brenda's time when I would normally be at home. It soon became all about Marie. When it became a daily routine, I began to withdraw from Brenda. Every time I attempted to spend quality time with my wife, Marie always seemed to be present. When I wanted Brenda to join me or when I planned to take Brenda out for dinner, what was once a communicative and open relationship soon became closed off and non-talkative. I couldn't express my feelings without Brenda becoming upset, accusing me of being harsh and unfair to her younger sister. If all I was going to do was upset my wife by attempting to be with her, then why bother? A few months after the growing girls' night out became a significant part of our lives, I could see that my marriage was in serious trouble. Yet I couldn't talk to my wife about it without her becoming upset and defensive. So I did the worst thing I could have done. I gave up. I spent my time pursuing my interests, and Brenda began doing her own thing. On our rare nights at home together, we felt like 2 strangers living in the same house. Then, one night or rather, early morning it all started. The night before, everything went awry. I was at home, working in the garage on a project on a Friday night. While Brenda and Marie were out on their usual Friday night outing, they left the house around 6:30, and I found myself preparing my own dinner, increasingly eating in the garage. So I got dinner ready, took it out there, and listened to my boombox as I worked and ate. I worked until 11 and then went inside. I half expected Brenda to be in bed already, but I was somewhat surprised to find she wasn't even home yet. I noticed the light flashing on the phone, indicating a waiting message. The message mentioned that she was staying at Marie's for the night due to being out for a while and not being in a condition to drive home. The message also conveyed the intention to see me in the morning. I thought to myself, why bother? I never see you anymore anyway, just move in with your sister and be happy. Yeah, I'll confess, I was angry and envious. I felt a void when Marie developed a particular interest in her sister, and now I couldn't figure out how to reclaim my wife. I longed to be with Brenda, missing our conversations, laughter, and the gentle banter of a couple who knew each other intimately. Recently, it seemed I also missed the playful moments we once shared. After replaying and deleting the voicemail, I overheard men's voices in the background at Marie's house with my wife, and it sounded like a party. When I called, after 9 rings, a man answered and mentioned it was my money, advising me not to waste it. I requested to speak to Brenda, but the man described her as being occupied and suggested calling back around noon the next day. He identified himself as her husband. Despite my insistence to speak to her, he abruptly hung up on me with a dismissive remark. Furious, I redialed multiple times over the next half hour, but nobody picked up. After trying 3 times and growing angrier, I finally had enough, snatching my car keys. I left the house and drove to Marie's, finding nobody home. Then I recalled I had dialed Brenda's cell phone. I had no idea where she was or who she was with. I didn't know if she was there willingly or if she had been abducted. I knew nothing. I drove home, angrier than ever angry and scared. I went in and poured myself a drink. At some point, I concluded that Brenda was doing this willingly, and the police wouldn't intervene for 24 hours. I even considered that Brenda had invited the men. My mind played tricks on me, worsened by drinks. In the morning, I woke with a pounding headache and dry mouth. After a shower and getting dressed, I took some aspirin. In the mirror, I saw a man with a haunted, lost look. After a light breakfast, I waited for either a phone call or Brenda to return. Around 2, she pulled into the driveway, looking great in one of my favorite dresses, slinky and tight-fitting, revealing lots of leg and a bit of chest. Brenda had only worn it on special occasions with me, and even then only if she intended for a late night. She explained that she hadn't come home the previous night, citing an evening with Marie involving a few too many drinks. By the time they reached Marie's place, she was too tired to drive, so she stayed there. Brenda mentioned crashing at her sister's place, sleeping until a little while ago, taking a quick shower, and now being back. Observing my demeanor, she inquired about my apparent upset, asking what was wrong. Mentioning my name, I expressed my concern, mentioning that I had called her cell several times the previous night. After the first call, the person who answered informed me that she was occupied. I identified myself as her husband, but he promptly hung up. Subsequent calls went unanswered. Observing the dress she was wearing, I couldn't help but wonder if she had worn it for someone else. Additionally, I questioned where she had worn it, as when I went to Mary's, neither of them was there, and her place was dark. Brenda took a seat, but unfortunately, she missed the chair as I spoke. She turned, reacting to the news that I had called, and a man had answered her cell phone, turning white in the face. It seemed she miscalculated the distance to the easy chair, landing about a foot or so away. Despite being on the floor, she remained motionless, hands on her face and tears streaming. Unable to bear the situation, I perceived her shame, and it was evident she had done something regrettable. Frustrated, I rose and stormed out to the garage. I locked the door, cranking up the stereo as loud as I could stand it. In those couple of hours, I accomplished little beyond venting my frustration by crushing things around and cursing at Marie, Brenda, and the person who answered the phone the previous night. As I cooled off and silenced the stereo, I pondered the unraveling of my marriage, attributing it all to Marie. In my perspective, happiness and love between Brenda and me had thrived before Marie, but she had driven us apart. Now it seemed Brenda sought happiness or satisfaction elsewhere, possibly from another man or worse, multiple men. During my time in the workshop, the realization sank in that I likely lost Brenda for good, heading towards a divorce. Returning to the house, I found myself alone, assuming Brenda sought solace at Mary's. In our bedroom, I was shocked to see Brenda's dresser drawers open and empty. Scanning the closet, I noticed only a few sporadic items hardly worn anymore. She had left me. Given it was a Sabbath, online banking was my only option. I went online, strategizing how to rearrange finances to safeguard myself if Brenda opted for a permanent departure. I was determined not to suffer financially after years of diligently building a substantial savings in the bank account. Subsequently, I reached out to a friend who had experienced divorce, scheduling a meeting to discuss Brenda and me. I also informed our kids about the strange situation between their mom and me, clarifying that she might have moved out. When my daughter inquired about her whereabouts, I honestly admitted I didn't know. Update: a week passed, during which I immersed myself in work, attempting to divert my focus from the disarray of my deteriorating home life. Each night, I resorted to drinking and sleeping, rising just in time for a quick shower before returning to work. This marked 1 week since I had last seen my wife. I met up with my friend, and our conversation didn't yield much advice beyond what I already had a sense of. The primary suggestion was to safeguard my assets first, then address Brenda's intentions and actions. Throughout the entire week, Brenda remained silent, with no phone calls or visits to my workplace. Until Saturday night, I became convinced she had abandoned our relationship long before now, likely involved with another man. That night, I decided to call Marie's house. Marie was surprised to learn that Brenda wasn't home with me, assuming she was still upset and staying close to home. I informed her that she hadn't seen Brenda at all, expressing that it wasn't right. I suggested that what happened between us was because of her. Marie contested, stating that it was awfully harsh and that I didn't mean that. I affirmed, expressing that I did mean it. We were fine until Marie started taking Brenda out every Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday night. I conveyed that her girls' nights out had ruined us, and I hoped she achieved whatever it was she was aiming for. I mentioned that Brenda was gone, and I was sure we were about to get divorced. If she wasn't with Marie, she must be with that person who answered her phone last Friday night. Marie, surprised that I knew about last Friday night, disclosed that on Saturday afternoon, Brenda showed up at home in her want-to-get-laid dress, all fresh and freshly showered. She shared that she told Brenda about some strange guy answering her phone, and Brenda sat on the floor and cried. Later on, when Marie came in from the garage, Brenda had packed her things and left. Marie concluded by saying that her actions had cost me my wife and warned her not to come around me again. Despite her pleas not to hang up, my anger prevented me from listening. I just wanted to shut everything other, Brenda, the other man, and life in general. The word furious didn't capture my feelings adequately. Simply hearing Marie on the phone reignited my rage. I was angry and lost, with my wife somewhere unknown and no means of repairing our relationship. After a heated exchange over the phone, I slammed it down so forcefully that I broke the handset, adding the purchase of a new phone to my growing list of concerns. It took a while before I mustered the energy to get up and go to bed, realizing I had been sitting in the same spot where Brenda had collapsed on me not so long ago. By morning, I concluded that I had come out on the losing end and would have been better off staying up all night drinking. A dreary Sunday morning greeted me, and I was in no mood to deal with anyone. Around noon, I heard a car pull up in our front driveway, and looking out the window, I saw my son emerging. My son asked about what had happened around here, mentioning that Mom came to his place a week ago, upset and crying. She wouldn't talk to him about anything except that I was going to leave her. He inquired about what was going on. I informed him that we were having problems, and that she left Mesh, packed her things, and ran. And this was the first I knew where she was at all this time. He mentioned that Mom came to his place, adding that it was kind of embarrassing, as he had a friend over and she spent the night. He didn't know where Mom had been. He asked when she showed up at my place. I answered that it was on Sunday, after he called and talked to me. She refused to let me call him and talk to him. She wanted me to leave him alone for fear that he'd hunt her down. He questioned what was going on and if I was going to hurt her. I explained that I was tired. It had been a week of worry and stress like none I'd ever had before. Now my son had to drive over 300 miles on a Sunday to ask me what was going on and why his mom was at his place, refusing to let him talk to me. Last week she went out with Aunt Mary. Mom told me about that. She ended up missing your call and somehow you got real angry about it. What got into you? Why would you do that? I explained that she missed my call, and that's what she told him, just that she missed my call. I shared that she mentioned someone else intercepted the call before she knew about it, and I got real mad at her. She was afraid, so she ran. He noted that she missed telling him some important details and asked me to tell him what happened. I recounted that last Friday night, Mom went out with Aunt Marie like clockwork. I was in the garage, working on a few things for a while, came in about 11, and found Mom wasn't home yet. I saw she had left a message on the phone that I had missed, stating she had too much to drink and was going to stay at Marie's. My son acknowledged that Mom told him about the message part. He mentioned that when she left the message, he replayed it to ensure he understood it correctly, noting that I often did that. He replayed it and heard men's voices in the background, which worried him, so he called Mom's cell phone. It rang 9 times, and a strange guy picked up. He asked to speak to her, and the guy told him she was tied up at the moment and to call back tomorrow afternoon. He identified himself as her husband, but the guy hung up after telling him to duck off. I responded, realizing that Mom had sugarcoated that part. He asked if Mom cheated on me, and I admitted that I wasn't sure what happened. She left before we talked about it, but she seemed guilty about something. I hadn't spoken to her since Saturday afternoon. He suggested that we needed to talk to each other, proposing that we come over to his place to discuss things. He assured us that he and his new girlfriend would be there to support us. I agreed to talk, and he emphasized that we should come as we are without weapons. He recognized my anger, but urged us to work things out and not let this situation fester. He offered to follow me home, and I considered riding with him in case things didn't work out at his place. He assured me that he would make sure I got home okay. During the drive to my son's place, I realized that I still had some love for Brenda, even if she had cheated on me. I think that right at that moment I was willing to try to work things out with her. When we got to Mark's place, he parked, and we went inside. His girlfriend was sitting with Brenda, and when I walked in, they both got up, looking nervous. She greeted me, asking how I had been. I felt the anger boiling inside me. Without checking myself, I began to blow up, barely managing to curtail my anger in time. I yelled at her, accusing her of cheating, and saw her shrinking from me. I had to pause and catch myself, apologizing for my outburst. I admitted that I had been okay, drinking a bit too much lately and feeling confused about things. She looked pale and nervous. The woman I loved, the woman I had spent the better part of my life with, was afraid of me. That hurt me deep inside. My heart was breaking. I loved her still, and she was afraid of me. I wondered if we could patch things up. Then a young woman, presumably the guest, interjected, introducing herself as Jill. She expressed a wish that we could have met under better circumstances. I took her proffered hand and shook it gently, responding that I shared the same sentiment and hoped we could get to know each other a bit more. Although Mark hadn't mentioned seeing anyone yet, I glanced knowingly at him, conveying a slight reprimand in my eyes. Jill urged us to talk while she and Mark would be in the other room, ready to intervene if things got difficult. They emphasized the need for us to keep our cool due to the thin walls and floors in the apartment building. After Mark and Jill left, Brenda began to explain things to me, expressing sincere apologies. I responded by asking if she had something to be sorry about, questioning if she had slept with some guy. She clarified that it wasn't exactly that, and I pressed for more information. I confronted her about sleeping with more than one guy, and her revelation stunned me. I was flat out shocked this was not the person I had married years ago, and I felt like I didn't know who she was anymore. She admitted that she didn't do this openly and freely of her own choice. She explained that she was drunk and had consumed too many drinks that night. Marie had been pushing her for weeks to get out, and perhaps loneliness played a role. She couldn't fully understand how it all came about, but suddenly found herself on a bed with two men. Initially, it started with just one guy, but by the end, she had been with all of them. Marie was there too, and by the end of the night, she had been with all of them, including Marie. The guys had arranged it in a way that she didn't consider it coercion, and she was drunk enough not to think about the consequences until it was far too late. Her revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. I had expected to hear she had cheated on me. I hadn't figured more than one man, nor her and Marie doing things together either. They were sisters, for Christ's sake. I sat there, not knowing what to say. Our talk had taken about 5 minutes so far, and we were already into the part about her having been with other men. She wasn't hiding I didn't think she was hiding anything from me. She must have read my mind. She expressed a willingness to tell me whatever I wanted to know, sharing, that she wasn't sure how everything came to be and when she became involved in it. She admitted to not remembering her wedding vows or her husband waiting at home. At one point, she found herself begging for more, and she described herself as a terrible person who didn't deserve me or even to live. Her sobs overtook her ability to speak, and she collapsed. I observed her, feeling unsure about the person in front of me, shocked and stunned. I couldn't find the words to respond. The situation overwhelmed me, and I started to feel ill. Update: I started to throw up. I calmed down and was able to settle my stomach with a glass of water. Wiping my face off, I returned to the kitchen table. Brenda was in tears, crying softly. I wanted to go to her and hold her. The problem was, I didn't know if it would be okay ever again. I sat down heavily, wanting to be able to know what to say or ask without getting sick again. She explained that the nights out with Marie were not for scouting men, and that it had never happened before. They had gone to a new club, and she had been drinking too much. The guys at the club were buying them drinks, dancing with them, and complimenting them, making her feel beautiful and playful. The next thing she knew, she called me and left a message that she was too drunk, and they went to the guy's place. I interjected, expressing my frustration, stating that lately she hadn't been paying attention to me. I pointed out that she and Marie were the reason, as they hadn't been letting me even try. I reminded her that I had tried to get her to go out with me, but she had insisted on being with Marie. I accused her of lying to me, as the message she left mentioned she was at Marie's place. She clarified that at the time, she thought they were going to Marie's place, but the men wanted to take them to their place first for a minute to pick up something. She explained that they didn't think it would be a problem, but ended up getting involved in a regrettable situation. She mentioned that if only she hadn't thought I should have paid more attention to her, she might have been better prepared to fend off what happened. I couldn't contain my frustration, raising my voice as she continued to suggest it was my fault. I pointed out that she had been the one ignoring me, consistently going out with Marie every Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday night. I accused her of pushing me out of her life and taking up Marie's cause. To me, I noticed a change in her eyes as she realized she couldn't blame me entirely for her actions. She admitted that she hadn't realized it was her fault until now and acknowledged that I was right about that part. She recognized that her constant presence with Marie had led to my lack of attention. I questioned if she enjoyed being in such situations, referring to her use of the term Scarlet Woman several times. She denied ever calling me a Scarlet Woman or treating me like one, expressing her hatred for it. I learned that she discovered she liked what she did with those men, citing the tastes, textures, sizes, and combinations as factors that intrigued her. She admitted to enjoying the different and new experiences and acknowledged that some of them were things she had always wanted to try with me, but couldn't bring herself to ask. She expressed regret for losing herself in the situation and recognized that she had lost me. She hated that she had engaged in intimate acts with other men, things that should have been reserved for me. I responded with a sense of uncertainty, stating that there might be a chance to move past this difficult time. She seized on this glimmer of hope, expressing a willingness to do anything to be with me and stay married. She promised not to go out anymore unless I was with her, committing to being a stay-at-home wife and doing anything I wanted. I remained skeptical, questioning her sudden willingness to talk and work with me. I raised concerns about her past actions, especially when she was going out with Marie, and questioned whether she would resume such behavior when things cooled off. I emphasized that Marie had driven a wedge between us, taking up the time we used to spend together. I expressed my discontent, stating that I was sorry for her previous actions. I conveyed that I had not fully realized the extent to which she had been ignoring and avoiding me, questioning why she allowed herself to do so. I made it clear that things wouldn't be simple moving forward, highlighting the fact that she had cheated on me and on us. I asked about her involvement with other men, emphasizing the emotional toll it took on me. I confronted her about the idea of passing it off as staying with Marie and questioned if she would have continued lying if I hadn't found out. I expressed my rising anger, and Brenda could see it in my eyes as my voice increased in volume. Mark and Jill discreetly entered the kitchen. In that instance, my son suggested a short break, proposing that either he and I or Jill and I could take a walk. Jill took hold of my arm, guiding me out of my chair. Though I had already half risen, her tug felt powerful, indicating her strength. She suggested that we go for a walk, allowing me to share my thoughts while Mark and Brenda had their conversation. I agreed, acknowledging that it was probably the best course of action. In that moment, my anger had been escalating, and it had reached a point where I might have lost control. The diversion provided by the suggestion to take a walk spared us from a potentially volatile situation, but the unsettling thought of what might have happened lingered in my mind. As we strolled about a block, Jill initiated a conversation with me. She acknowledged my anger, expressing that Brenda and she had discussed Brenda's actions while Mark had fetched me. Jill conveyed that Brenda was genuinely remorseful and sorry for jeopardizing her marriage, plagued by guilt over the entire situation. I listened to her, absorbing the information. Eventually, I responded, emphasizing Brenda's significant mistakes. I articulated my frustration, highlighting how Brenda's sister Marie had taken up much of her time that she had previously spent with me. The revelation of their involvement in a drunken encounter fueled my resentment, and I expressed a deep sense of hatred at that moment, unsure whether I would ever overcome it. Jill shared a personal anecdote about her parents, revealing that they had faced a similar situation a few years ago when her mom went out with friends and ended up getting involved with someone. Her initial concern for her dad's reaction shifted to relief when they managed to work things out, although she clarified that it didn't necessarily mean they stayed married. Acknowledging the complexity of Brenda's actions, Jill emphasized that Brenda's mistake was significant and had occurred on multiple levels. Despite this, Jill believed that Brenda still loved me. She reassured me that, despite appearances, Brenda hadn't cast me aside. According to Jill, Brenda had made a grave error, finding herself in a situation that spiraled out of control too quickly. Jill attributed such situations to the influence of drinks and medications, leading to lowered inhibitions, peer pressure, and unintended consequences. Walking and talking with Jill, I expressed my perspective on the situation, mentioning that Brenda had strayed while I remained faithful. I also pointed out the impact of Brenda's sister Marie frequently coming over and taking her away from me. As we continued our conversation, I noticed my anger subsiding, thanks in part to Jill's soft and soothing way of talking. Reflecting on the uncertain future of my relationship with Brenda, I admitted to feeling messed up inside. Despite attempting to sound cheerful, I couldn't shake the emotional turmoil. I acknowledged that part of my struggle involved understanding how Brenda found herself in such a situation. Suppressing my anger, I tried to maintain composure, recognizing the need to rise above any potential righteous indignation. Jill encouraged me to ask any questions I had. Though I attempted to lift my mood, the emotional toll persisted. Jill inquired about the state of our relationship before Marie's frequent visits. I shared that, despite the natural fading of the initial magic in our 20-year marriage, I believed things were fine, perhaps even better than many couples with the time we spent together. In our conversation, Jill asked if I used to take Brenda out frequently. I admitted that perhaps I had taken her for granted and that Marie played a significant role in driving a wedge between us. I explained that whenever I attempted to spend time with Brenda, Marie interfered, either causing Brenda to refuse or getting upset for taking her away from her sister. I expressed my frustration with Marie, referring to her as the bish at the moment. Jill probed deeper, asking about the romantic aspects of our relationship. I confessed that, given our long history together, I assumed the effort to maintain the relationship was a thing of the past. Jill emphasized the importance of romance, distinguishing it from mere physical relationships. I acknowledged the oversight and recognized the need to express my feelings more, regretting not putting in more effort to make Brenda feel cherished. As Jill continued to guide me through self-reflection, she emphasized the significance of small gestures in nurturing a relationship. I admitted that I should have worked harder to convey my thoughts and feelings to Brenda, realizing that being more romantic might have made a difference. Jill's efforts to make me think clearly were evident, though I acknowledged that Brenda's time with Marie had already taken away the opportunity for equal time together. Jill pointed out that some of the biggest fights in our marriage revolved around Brenda and Marie's girls' nights out, emphasizing that Brenda seemed more focused on her sister than on our relationship. She suggested that our drift apart was noticeable, and while acknowledging Brenda's wrongdoing, she also hinted that better communication and understanding might have prevented the situation. I expressed frustration, wondering if Jill was taking Brenda's side, but she assured me that it wasn't about blame. Jill acknowledged that Brenda needed something she wasn't getting from me, and if we had addressed those issues earlier, it might have averted the crisis. I defended my efforts, stating that I never considered cheating, despite my frustrations with Brenda's time spent with Marie. Jill urged me to talk to Brenda directly, advising a calm and direct approach. She reminded me that Mark thought highly of me and emphasized that divorce might not be the solution. Encouraging open communication, Jill suggested that resolving our issues through conversation could rekindle our love and help us move past the recent challenges. Update: I wish I could exude the confidence Jill showed. She seemed knowledgeable, possibly having learned from her parents' past troubles. Back at Mark's, Brenda was composed, waiting for our conversation. I confronted Brenda about the state of our relationship, expressing uncertainty about where we stood. Brenda admitted she wanted to be with me, but acknowledged the uncertainty of my acceptance after her betrayal. She apologized sincerely, emphasizing that apologies couldn't undo what happened and that we needed to face and address the issue. In response, I conveyed my struggle not only with the act of cheating but also with the circumstances involving multiple individuals. I pointed out the hurtful aspect of involving her sister and expressed the pain of trying to win her back while she was unresponsive, only for her to seek a chance after being with others. Brenda regretted her actions, claimed it was never her intention to cheat, and attributed the situation to the influence of drinks. I questioned whether there was still room for me in her life, expressing concerns about the impact of her choices on our relationship. The conversation left us both grappling with the complexities of trust, forgiveness, and the potential for rebuilding our connection. Brenda pleaded with me not to say certain things, expressing her love for me and acknowledging her severe mistake. She admitted the impossibility of undoing that terrible night, expressing her hope for forgiveness and trust in the future. Brenda proposed a trial separation, recognizing our uncertainties about the way forward. As she spoke, a tear welled up in Brenda's eye, indicating her preparedness for my potential decision. I felt torn between conflicting emotions, a sense of satisfaction in seeing her pain mixed with a deep love and desire not to lose her. Brenda, however, expressed understanding if I chose to pursue a divorce, recognizing her lack of excuses and the inability of her words to prevent my departure. She reluctantly agreed to a trial separation if that was what I thought we needed. Jill intervened forcefully, cautioning against a trial separation that could lead to a swift divorce. Drawing from the experience of her own parents, she suggested a different approach, emphasizing the importance of facing the mistake together. Proposing separation within the same house to encourage communication and working through the issues rather than drifting further apart, I remained silent, absorbing Jill's perspective on the matter. The authority in her voice resonated with some truth to me. I acknowledged that what she said was reasonable, but what about those thoughts of mine and my pleasure in Brenda's pain? I looked at Brenda and contemplated for a bit could I let her into my house again. Could I resist the urge to kick or hurt her over the next weeks or months? Could I ever learn to cope with all that had happened? Jill's voice broke the silence, addressing me and my son, expressing concern about the situation. Mark joined in, questioning what was happening and awaiting a response. I acknowledged the pressure, expressing uncertainty about the safety of a trial separation, considering my current anger. I admitted to feeling a significant amount of anger over the situation. Jill and Mark understood my emotions, and Jill emphasized the importance of being together to work through our issues. Citing her parents' experience, she insisted that staying together and facing the challenges was the only way to find out if we could make it work. I contemplated Jill's words, pondering the realistic alternatives available to us. Expressing my doubts, I found it challenging to believe that being with Brenda and working through our issues was the right solution. The lingering anger I felt raised concerns about the potential for physical damage if we were together. I was aware of the toll our separation had taken on both of us over the past week, and I didn't want us to become another statistic in the grand scheme of life. Addressing Mark and Jill, I expressed my displeasure with feeling coerced into a decision. I made it clear that I wouldn't make such a crucial choice under duress. Instead, I requested Mark to take me to a motel for the time being, promising to communicate my decision the next morning after having some time to reflect on the situation. Update: when I returned the next morning in a cab, Brenda appeared to be still sitting in the same place, and Mark and Jill had noticeably more somber expressions on their faces than they had yesterday. It was evident that none of them had slept at all. I knew I had to give them my answer. I suggested to Brenda that she should return home, assuring her that I would make an effort not to damage her physically. However, I acknowledged the likelihood of occasional outbursts of anger, emphasizing the need to be together to address our issues. I proposed a temporary arrangement where we would stay in separate bedrooms, physically apart, yet attempting to work through our challenges. I made it clear that I couldn't guarantee anything beyond that. Brenda sat there, tears running down her face. I could see she was happy about it, yet apprehensive too. She was thinking, what if I got violent or something? I could see it in her eyes. I probably had the same look in mine too. Trust goes a long way to dispelling that look, and the trust in our marriage was now long gone. It was going to be a long, hard road for a while. Brenda suggested counseling, a topic that had crossed my mind earlier when her nights out with Marie had already strained our relationship. I acknowledged the need for counseling, both individually and together, and agreed to initiate the process the next day. Brenda, in response, left the kitchen briefly and returned with suitcases in hand. My son, Mark, asked if we could go home, and I mentioned that my car was in a local parking garage. Mark volunteered to retrieve it, and Jill offered to drive. In the midst of this, Mark dropped a surprising bombshell. He had proposed to Jill last Saturday night, and she had accepted. I expressed my acceptance of Jill into the family and wished them happiness together, regardless of what happened between Brenda and me. We left together. It was a quiet, intense trip home, though each of us was in deep thought. That whole next week went the same way, tension kept building and building. Our first appointment together with the counselor was the following week, and I wasn't sure we'd make it. We did, but just barely. We made that first appointment and the following ones, until one day the counselor cut us loose on our own. We had spent the last 8 months going once a week together. Separate individual visits were interspersed between those. We worked it out, and while it was not easy, we managed to get around the whole nightmare in the end. One day, Brenda came home from the doctor, appearing troubled. I sensed that something serious was amiss, but she hesitated to disclose the news. Eventually, she took a solitary walk, and when she got back, she informed me in the living room, "Jeff, I have some bad news about me." I asked what, knowing that she'd never cheat on me again. I also understood that she'd been bothered by something for quite some time now. Brenda had always been one that didn't like to talk about her issues with anyone, even doctors. She broke down, crying, expressing, "I am sick, Jeff. Real sick. They said that I have cancer." I learned that it started in her ovaries and had spread, and unfortunately they didn't catch it in time. As she left the statement unfinished, she conveyed, "They don't think." I was numb for the second time in my life. I questioned what she meant. Brenda reassured me that we would fight, that this cancer could be beaten, there were treatments, and we would win this battle together. I shared my thoughts with her, mentioning that each thing I said seemed to bring more tears from Brenda. As time passed, I began to wonder if she was going to fight at all. She conveyed, "It's beyond fixing, Jeff." This appointment today was with a specialist that my doctor wanted me to see. He ran a few tests and made me wait for the results. He was about to cry when he told me the news. Brenda revealed that the cancer had spread to her lymph glands and liver, along with other parts of her body. There was concern it might have reached her head, and the mention of the MRI was distressing. Tearfully, she expressed, "Oh God, I don't want to die, Jeff. I don't. I love you." Regretfully, she admitted, "I wasted all that time with Marie and caused our troubles when I should have gone in to see the doctor way back then. It's my fault. I ignored some of the symptoms. It spread. I wanted to be there for Marie since I thought she needed me. It's too late now. I only have a few months. I am so sorry, Jeff." I expressed. "Brenda, I'm the one that's sorry. What can I do for you? What can we do?" She replied, "Just hold me, Jeff. Love me and hold me. That's all anyone can do for me now." I followed her request, holding her close. Forgotten were those days of anger and pain. We now faced new challenges, anger and pain brought by the dreaded cancer. Despite the time we were apart and Brenda had fallen, we had generally been a happy couple. I made an effort to maintain a positive and happy attitude around Bren throughout the time she wasted away. At some point, we believed that some of the treatments might have been helping her, but later we discovered that was not the case. She outlasted the doctor's original estimate by a few months. Fortunately, she had her children and me by her side when she passed away. This is why I have issues with Marie. I question if I am being unfair, if I should forgive and forget. However, I find it difficult because Marie led my wife into a net of pain and suffering, causing us to lose precious time together, almost tearing us apart. Nearly a whole year was destroyed, a year that could have been spent loving each other, not struggling to overcome Brenda's one-night mistake. Additionally, there's the lingering question of whether that cancer could have been detected earlier. I don't know. I'll always wonder, though.
Story 2.
Why am I driving to my mother's house at 11 o'clock at night in the pouring rain? Why are my husband and children safe and dry at home, probably already asleep in their beds? Why did Bradley threaten to divorce me? I haven't even done anything. What the heck is going on? Why won't anybody talk to me? My name is Emma Smith. Except professionally, I go by my maiden name, Johnson. My husband, Bradley, never had a problem with that. He understood how important it was to me that I earned my degrees and certifications in clinical psychology under my own name before we got married. He was always supportive, and that's why we didn't have the ceremony until I was 26. That day, just over 9 years ago, was probably the happiest day of my life. We had the perfect wedding, not too big, not too small, and all of our families were there. My father, Jim, is an amazing dancer. He'd been taking lessons for something like 15 years. That's how he met his wife, Grace. Technically, she's my stepmom, but I was already 17 when they first met, so she didn't have a hand in raising me. My mother, Linda, was also there with her fourth husband, Glenn. Having them all together at the wedding was a major feat of diplomacy, but it went smoothly. I even saw Mom sitting at a table with Dad and Grace while I was dancing with Bradley. After the father-daughter dance, we wanted to start our family right away since we'd waited to get married. Braylon is 8 and Caden is 6. A girl and a boy, 2 years apart. Just like me and my younger brother Tommy. I know it's silly, but it makes me feel like I accomplished everything correctly. They're at home now, and I'm not. I should go back. I don't know why I should have to do this. I belong in my house with my family, and Bradley needs to just get over his hurt feelings and accept what's going to happen. I need to go back home. I need to make things right with him, but I can't. I'm not welcome. I should explain. I arrived home early, as I'd planned. I had the groceries I needed for Bradley's favorite dinner, my mom's meatloaf recipe, believe it or not, and a nice bottle of red wine, Idaho potatoes, sour cream, chives, Wisconsin cheddar cheese, and Brussels sprouts. I know lots of people don't like them, but I roast them with olive oil and a little salt and pepper, and they're just perfect. Key lime pie for dessert. Oh, and a few delicate little things I'd picked up at Victoria's Secret that Tuesday. So we'd spend the weekend making things special before I left for my conference. The one he didn't know about yet. The one I was planning on telling him about after dinner. It took me almost an hour to get everything ready. While the meatloaf was in the oven, I cleaned off the table and vacuumed the dining room, put out the good place settings, and had time to shower, do my hair and makeup, and slip into my new blue dress. The color really brings out my eyes. I dressed it up with a necklace Bradley had given me for our 5th anniversary. The kids liked my meatloaf okay, but I had to make mac and cheese for them since they wouldn't eat the potatoes or the sprouts. The instant he got home, after picking up the kids, the show began. Braylon and Caden tore around like the whirlwinds they are, and we barely managed to change their shoes and put away their things before dinner. I served their food, got them seated, and was pouring the wine when Bradley joined us, his eyebrow raised in question. I just smiled, beaming the most loving, adoring smile I could muster. It only seemed to make him more concerned. Everyone was happy and pleased. They all praised my cooking. The kids devoured their meal and even had a small slice of key lime pie each. Caden didn't like his, saying it tasted sour. Braylon finished it for him after we settled them in front of their favorite movie, one they'd seen countless times. Bradley nudged me back into the dining room, where he had already tidied up and loaded the dishwasher. He poured the last of the red wine for me, and a finger of Glenmorangie for himself, neat, before taking his seat. He inquired if I would disclose the reason behind the evening's special arrangements, questioning if I couldn't surprise him without a particular occasion. I expressed my enjoyment of the evening and acknowledged the effort put into the dinner, but highlighted that it wasn't a birthday, anniversary, or any special day. It was simply a Friday night, prompting him to inquire further. I admitted to playfully deceiving him, hinting that I might need his help next week. He asked about the nature of the favor, and I explained that I would be attending a conference in Chicago for 4 days, from Tuesday to Friday, requiring him to take on the role of a single dad temporarily. His demeanor shifted slightly as he acknowledged the responsibility he would have to shoulder in my absence. Anticipating our time apart, I teased him with promises of a passionate weekend together before my departure. I leaned forward, adding a suggestive glance to my words, hinting at the excitement to come upon my return. He nodded skeptically, questioning why he was just hearing about the conference at that moment. I explained that the invitation had recently come up, highlighting that I had only been invited and hadn't discussed it earlier. Despite my attempts to reassure him, he expressed his disappointment at being informed late and his concern about the situation. My attempts to calm him down seemed to have the opposite effect. He suddenly stood up, gesturing for me to remain seated, and muttered his frustration, clearly upset. He tried to control his emotions, acknowledging his desire to avoid arguing in front of the children. He instructed me to put the kids to bed and indicated that he needed time to gather his thoughts before continuing the discussion. With a tense grip on the chair, he shook his head and went upstairs, leaving me to reflect on how the conversation had not gone as planned. He spent the next 20 minutes pacing around the house like an agitated tiger. Glancing at his phone, he'd angrily read something, mutter curses under his breath, and resume pacing. At one point, he made a call and left a voicemail, saying, "It's Bradley. She's acting like Linda right now. It's happening now. Please call me the instant you get this." What on earth did acting like Linda mean? What did my mom have to do with this? Not long after, his phone rang, and he stepped outside to take the call, shooting me a glare. Clearly, he didn't want me or the kids to overhear. He returned inside, but was called out again after a brief moment. The kids seemed puzzled, but unfazed by his behavior. As the movie neared its end, he disappeared into the kitchen, where I heard his coffee grinder buzzing. Surprisingly, Braylon and Caden didn't resist their bedtime routine much, brushing their teeth and getting into pajamas without fuss. Somehow, they sensed that something was amiss. I, too, felt jittery throughout. What was troubling him? What did he know? Who was he talking to? And why bring up Mom? With the kids tucked in, I descended to find Bradley back at the table with a full pot of coffee, 2 mugs, and a large Yeti cup. He instructed me to sit, and I obeyed. He poured the coffee, but I declined, mentioning that it would keep me awake. He insisted, saying I would need it. I pressed him to tell me what was bothering him, and he responded by saying he would if I would, assuring me that nothing was wrong. He explained that I was worrying unnecessarily, emphasizing that it was just a conference, a one-time event that I needed to do for myself. I questioned his motives, and he reaffirmed his stance, saying it was exactly as he had stated. He expressed dissatisfaction with the taste of the coffee, prompting me to question what was wrong. Despite my reassurance that the coffee was fine, he began a conversation by asking if I considered him stupid. After affirming that I didn't, he questioned whether I believed myself to be smarter due to my graduate degree in psychology. I denied this and affirmed my respect for him as my husband, partner, and human being. He emphasized the importance of honesty in our conversation and warned against half-truths or sugarcoating. He insisted that he knew more about the situation than I thought and cautioned against lying or manipulation, emphasizing that it wouldn't end well if I attempted to deceive him. I assured him that I would never deceive him, but suggested that he might be deceiving himself. He questioned when I was invited to the conference and how long I had known about it. I explained that I had only mentioned it that evening, claiming it had just happened. He pressed further, asking if I had known before Tuesday, and implying that I had planned the evening to soften him up for the news. I defended myself, insisting it wasn't like that, but his silence spoke volumes. I suggested that we go through the questions again. He asked who had invited me to the conference, to which I replied it was a colleague. He continued to inquire about who was covering the expenses for my attendance, pressing for a direct answer. I mentioned that I would reimburse them, but he insisted on a clearer response regarding who had arranged the fees, airfare, and accommodation. He expressed concern over our account statements for the past 3 months, suggesting that either I had planned this earlier or had undisclosed accounts. Despite his evident upset, I reassured him that he had nothing to worry about. He asked if Richard Taylor was attending the conference. I started feeling a surge of dread. A voice in my head mocked me for being foolish, but I pushed back, telling it to shut up and insisting that Bradley didn't know anything for certain. I admitted that Richard might be there, as he was presenting on Wednesday. Bradley showed me the conference agenda on his phone, expressing surprise that I didn't know about it, given my close friendship and professional relationship with Richard. I confessed that I did know, but had forgotten. Bradley urged me to stop making up stories and reminded me that he wasn't foolish, leaving me with nothing more to say. Bradley suggested recapping the situation. He asserted that weeks or months ago, my older colleague, who he implied had romantic intentions toward me, invited me on a fully funded romantic trip to the city, which I accepted. He accused me of springing this news on him last minute, distracting him with closeness, food, and romance, and leaving him with the responsibility of the kids to prevent his interference. I protested, denying his accusations. He reminded me of his earlier request not to lie to him or to myself, to which I insisted that I wasn't lying. Bradley interrogated me about the duration of my involvement with Richard. I denied any involvement, but he pressed further, asking about Richard's involvement with me and whether I had been involved with anyone else. He threw in a random question about the capital of California to check my presence of mind. My thoughts raced as I reassured myself that Richard couldn't possibly know anything, as we hadn't been do lovemaking. I believed Bradley had to trust me, being my husband. Bradley persisted, accusing me of being clouded by an affair fog and observing my guilty expression. I denied having an affair, but he suggested that perhaps I wasn't involved with Richard yet, noticing my expression change. I explained that Richard had invited me to the conference 6 weeks prior and assured Bradley that we would have separate accommodations and that I would reimburse Richard for expenses. I emphasized the conference's significance for my career and pleaded with Bradley to trust me, reaffirming my love and loyalty to him. Bradley took a slow sip of his black coffee, emphasizing his preference for unadulterated quality. He accused me of diluting that quality by planning everything behind his back, betraying him with secrets, lies, and deception. He asserted that my actions constituted betrayal, though the extent of it remained uncertain. I took a deep breath, trying to reassure myself that I hadn't done anything wrong yet. Bradley accused me of leaving myself vulnerable and setting myself up for closeness with Richard Taylor, suggesting that my actions indicated anticipation rather than explicit planning. I acknowledged that he wasn't entirely wrong in his assessment. My guilt resurfaced, leaving me speechless. Bradley questioned the purpose of the lingerie I had purchased, pointing out that he had seen the charges on the account. I explained that it was intended for him, for our weekend together, and for when I returned from the trip, though there wasn't much packed for the trip itself. He questioned whether any of the items were specifically for Richard, to which I hesitated before admitting that some might have been. Despite my assurances, Bradley expressed his lack of trust in me and his concerns about the situation. He asserted that my actions gave him plenty of reasons to worry, and he set down his mug, signaling the seriousness of the conversation. He laid out the terms, instructing me to leave the house immediately and go to my mother's place. He emphasized that I was not welcome and needed to have a serious conversation about married women's conduct. I was to stay overnight with Tom and Bernice, as he had already informed them, and they were expecting me. I protested, calling it absurd and claiming he couldn't do that. He countered by stating that what was truly absurd was going on a honeymoon with someone else and expecting him to accept it. He reminded me that we had dealt with similar situations before and warned me that if I didn't learn from this, the marriage would be over. He expressed his seriousness, stating that he was dead serious about his decision. I argued that he couldn't force me as he was my husband, not my boss. He acknowledged that he couldn't control me, but emphasized that if he didn't approve of my actions, he could file for divorce, asserting that it was a matter of partnership within the marriage. Despite my disbelief and protestations, he insisted on ending the marriage, stating that we would sort out the details later and that he would hire a lawyer the next day to serve me with divorce papers. In an attempt to prevent further action, he instructed me to visit my mother and suggested that if I wanted him to refrain from taking legal action, I should comply with his instructions. He reassured me that my mother was expecting me and had been informed about the situation. My phone rang, and he urged me to answer. It was my mom, who warned me about the seriousness of the situation and advised me to comply with Bradley's instructions to avoid regret. She mentioned bacon cookies and hung up, leaving me in shock. My phone buzzed again, and it was my brother, Tommy, who must have sent another message. He expressed concern about my situation, offering the spare room set up as a nursery for me and assuring me that I could stay as long as needed. Tommy emphasized that I should call when on my way, even if it meant waking them up during feedings. I declined Tommy's offer, but he insisted I come over by the next morning, threatening to sever our relationship if I didn't comply. He made it clear that taking sides against Bradley wasn't an option, asserting Bradley's correctness about the family curse. Tommy concluded the conversation by announcing plans to take everyone to IHOP the next day. Left alone, I questioned Bradley about what he had told Tommy and our family. Bradley stood up and explained that he had shared the truth with them, finding their insights helpful. He encouraged me to finish my coffee, pack a bag, and mentioned making a caramel latte for the road. Bradley assured me he would handle the kids, update his family, and postpone informing Chuck and Bethany to avoid an immediate revelation to my father, who would be devastated. Confused and alarmed, I pressed Bradley for details, particularly about Tommy's mention of a family curse. Bradley redirected me to discuss it with Linda, my soon-to-be ex-wife, leaving me puzzled about the unfolding situation. After downing the coffee with extra skim milk and 2 Splendas on my way out, a 16-ounce Yeti cup of double-shot non-fat caramel latte, a stop for gas, and 2 more for bathroom breaks, I pulled into Mom's driveway at 10 minutes past midnight. The garage door opened and I parked in the empty bay. Where was Doug's car? Mom greeted me and expressed happiness at my arrival. She mentioned the importance of me coming and shook her head, suggesting it wouldn't have been good otherwise. Inviting me inside, she informed me about cookies in the kitchen and offered tea. At 60, Mom still looked elegant. She maintained her figure gracefully, though it was showing its age. Her posture was impeccable. Despite having 2 children, she seemed untouched by osteoporosis. Her dark hair was streaked with gray but still lustrous and stylishly arranged, and her eyes were as blue as ever. Like mine. I hoped to look half as good at her age. She began pouring tea without any request from me. I mentioned my preference for no caffeine, explaining that Bradley had made me drink both coffee and a double shot, leaving me jittery. She assured me that the tea she was serving was chamomile, and reassured me that I would be fine, giving me a once-over. She mentioned that I had worn the same dress when talking to Bradley earlier that night. I explained that Bradley didn't allow me to change before kicking me out. I had to grab some stuff and leave. Tommy seemed distressed, repeating, "Oh my," and when I questioned what was wrong with the dress, they mentioned its significance and Tommy's reference to a curse. Confused and desperate for information, I asked about Tommy's comment and the ongoing situation. In response, she handed me homemade ginger snaps and suggested we move to the sitting room for an explanation. There, I noticed the TV showing a paused football game, surprising me because my mom typically avoided football. I inquired about Doug's whereabouts, and she revealed that Doug usually stayed with his friend Brian, with whom he had been in a relationship for almost 20 years. The revelation about Doug's handsomeness left me puzzled about why my mom was married to him. She detailed a complicated story about their marriage with Doug, emphasizing the societal pressures that led them to be married. They acknowledged the acceptance of gay couples marrying nowadays, but explained that, at their age, there were various complexities and layers to their situation. Doug, despite admitting he was gay, did not fully accept himself as such, and did not see himself living openly as a gay man. Instead, he considered his relationship with Brian unique. She clarified that Doug didn't feel shame about being gay. It just wasn't how he identified himself. They referred to their situation as being a beard, an old-fashioned term where gay men and lesbians would marry to meet societal expectations but maintain private lives outside the marriage. When asked about their own involvement, she denied being gay but admitted to being a terrible wife. They confessed to ruining their previous marriages due to various negative traits, especially hurting their father deeply. Tears welled up as they expressed their enduring love for their father and admitted noticing the love between me and Bradley, urging me not to become like them. Overwhelmed with emotion, she broke down crying. In response to my confusion, they briefly rose from their seat, gesturing for me to stay put, mentioning they needed to fetch something to show me. While she was away, I heard her rummaging in one of the spare bedrooms. Glancing at the screen, I noticed it wasn't displaying the game, but was paused on two middle-aged male commentators. They might have been football players in their prime before age caught up with them. Mom returned with a blue dress in a clear plastic dry cleaning cover. She noted that the dress they were showing me wasn't exactly the same as the one they wore. While the style differed, the skirt's length and color were nearly identical. They shared that they had worn this dress the night they ended their marriage to my father, almost 30 years ago. The reason for keeping the dress remained unclear to them, whether as a reminder of mistakes, a connection to their time with Jim, or because it made them feel beautiful. They recounted wearing the dress once more on their birthday that year, but it only made things worse. The incident happened in February, during a snowed-in period with little sunlight. They had bought the dress for Valentine's Day, but the plans were canceled, and they ended up spending it with me and someone else. Jim never saw the dress, and to add to the unfortunate circumstances, it was a leap year, extending the duration of the dreaded month. At the time, I was part of a group of women and their husbands. I barely remember their names now. As couples, we were all pleasant, but when it was just us women, well, you wouldn't believe the scheming and gossip. We'd talk about what we'd do if the right man came along. One woman regularly cheated on her husband and boasted about it. Another was planning an affair with a coworker, and we all supported her. Fortunately, her husband caught on before it went too far. I never engaged in any of that until one day I did. There was a local sports star who frequented bars and clubs, targeting married women and humiliating their husbands. He seemed to enjoy the power he had over them. He'd take these women to his hotel and give them an unforgettable experience, aiming to ruin them for other men. He was charming, wealthy, and famous, so he got away with it repeatedly. His activities were something of an open secret among women seeking excitement. I don't know how many marriages he destroyed, but it was more than a few. It was like a game to him. One of those venues was a dinner dance hall affiliated with the hotel. Our group of cheaters and aspirants decided to bring our husbands there on February 29th, Leap Night, to reconnect with each other and our spouses. You and Tommy were staying overnight with the porters, and we all had hotel rooms. What our husbands didn't realize was that attending with them was akin to buying raffle tickets. Mark Lavalier would select one fortunate lady for the evening, making her his chosen companion. That's why the night out excited us girls so much. My attention turned to the screen where Mark Lavalier, the commentator on the left, appeared. His name was displayed in a graphic beneath his chest, confirming his identity. As the revelation unfolded, it became apparent that Mark Lavalier was Mommy's awful boyfriend. The disclosure shattered my reality, leaving me feeling instantly dizzy and unwell. When questioned about it, I couldn't recall much, only vague memories of staying with Nana and Grandpa while Dad was gone for a while when I was 6 years old. The details were hazy, but I vaguely remembered being upset during that time. My parents had tried to shield me from the situation, acknowledging that I might not recall any of it. During that period, Dad had disappeared for weeks, and counseling was sought as a way to address the issues in their marriage. Mom admitted to attempting to manipulate or control Dad, as he had accused her of doing. The counseling turned into a disaster, and Dad left for Atlanta in a fit of anger for 10 days. Mom didn't know where he had gone until later, when he started taking temporary work assignments out of town. The mistreatment from Mom led to Dad's anger and departure from their marriage. Mom further revealed an incident with Mark approaching their table, taking her for a dance without permission. They danced for several songs, and Mark instructed Mom to slip out the back with him. When returning to the table for her purse, Mom faced Jim, who had witnessed the entire encounter. Jim covered for her, distracting Dad and allowing Mom to leave. This marked the end of her marriage to Dad. The separation and divorce took another 1.5 years, marking the real conclusion of Mom's marriage. Reflecting on that time, Mom expressed sorrow, acknowledging that the experience was beyond dreadful. However, she asserted that the worst part wasn't the separation itself, but rather the reasons behind it. Mom confessed that she would have sabotaged her marriage eventually, even if Mark, the scoundrel, hadn't chosen her that night. She highlighted her repeated destructive behavior with 3 different husbands, admitting her self-centered and entitled mindset, which she believed mirrored my current behavior. Mom emphasized that recognizing such behavior wasn't apparent at the time, and insisted that only a different perspective would reveal it. This conversation, she explained, was a kind of intervention, hoping that sharing her story would provide me with insight to change my ways before it's too late. She then shared her thoughts during her marriage with Jim, describing it as solid and deeply committed. Despite Jim being a wonderful and devoted husband, she succumbed to the temptation of a rare opportunity with Marc Lavalier, who promised to transform her into a glamorous, liberated goddess for a single night of enchanting closeness. After that night, Mom expected to return to her loving husband, believing that Jim's love would eventually overcome any initial hurt. She detailed waking up in her mother's recliner, having fainted due to the overwhelming situation. Mom handed me water and cookies, explaining that I had been unconscious for about 30 minutes. She suggested I wouldn't sleep given the circumstances, and encouraged me to stay and continue the conversation. I expressed my intention to go to bed, but Mom doubted I would sleep, given the resonance of her story with my thoughts. I reluctantly agreed that her story had indeed resonated with me. As I sat with the clear bag containing her blue dress next to me, Mom expressed concern about the possibility of me following in her footsteps. She questioned whether I was destined to ruin every marriage I entered, contemplating if I took my husband for granted while seeking solace in other men. Despite not having strayed yet, she acknowledged my intention to do so. She urged me to listen to my inner voice and expressed concern about the potential doom of my marriage if I continued down this path. When she inquired about my inner turmoil, she considered it a good sign that I was conflicted, but sighed in acknowledgement of the struggle. Mom acknowledged her own skill in silencing the voice of reason, admitting the difficulty of diagnosing and treating herself as a psychologist. She understood the rationalizations I had made, convincing myself that entertaining another man was acceptable, emphasizing the exhilaration and validation it provided. She cautioned against the dangerous thinking that Bradley's forgiveness would pardon or accommodate such transgressions, likening it to a medication that could lead to self-destruction. She highlighted the broader impact on Bradley, Braylon, Caden, Tommy, herself, and even my father, expressing deep concern about 3 generations of Johnson women following the same pattern of self-destruction. The thought of devastating my father by witnessing this cycle weighed heavily on her. As Mom delved into family history, she clarified that Nana, being a Reed, did not have any known instances of infidelity. However, she pointed to Gamma Carroll, who cheated on James, Jim's father, while he was sick and dying. Having a boyfriend named Ralph, Carroll eventually married him after James passed, but the marriage didn't last due to mutual unfaithfulness. Bob entered the picture later through a cancer family support group, and Jim initially distanced himself from his mother, holding her responsible for James's pass away. Mom explained that I might not have known this family history because I and Dad were already divorced when they started visiting Gamma Carroll and Bob in Colorado. Dad forgave Carroll eventually, bridging the divide between them, and he even became friends with Bob. Despite Bob not being at fault, Dad forgave his mother but struggled to forgive Mom. However, he eventually forgave her at my wedding after 20 years, even though she felt she didn't deserve it. She had been unrepentant, apologizing mainly for the cost it imposed on their relationship and attributing his hurt feelings to his fault. She admitted to being proud of the affair, emphasizing that her pride was the whole point. Mom expressed her fear of being single, noting that she had never experienced it and wouldn't know how to exist alone. Contrasting this with Dad, who had the wisdom to give himself time before getting seriously involved with someone else, She admitted her lack of understanding about his approach. She acknowledged giving Mark her number the first night they met, leading to subsequent calls and messages. Despite not planning it, she found herself caught up in another one of Mark's pickup spots, contributing to the cycle of relationships without sufficient self-reflection. 2 weeks later, on St. Patrick's Day at an Irish pub, Mom recounted her shameful behavior when her marriage with Dad was hanging in the balance. She continued to see Mark quietly, even while attempting to patch things up with Dad. Mom thought her interactions with Mark had nothing to do with her relationship with Jim, believing that what he didn't know wouldn't hurt him. Reflecting on her actions, she considered herself stupid and foolish. In an attempt to deceive Dad, Mom pretended to break up with Mark by staging a phone call, playing the recording for Dad. However, Mark persisted until he was certain the divorce was finalized, then moved on to another conquest, a married woman named Maureen. By that time, Mom had already arranged to marry Jeff. Mom emphasized the need to grasp the entire narrative, as it wasn't solely about Dad and Mark, but extended further to her marriage with Jeff. Despite Jeff being a decent guy, Mom acknowledged he wasn't Jim. She married Jeff because he was available, and while she might have made it work with effort, she chose not to. Devoted to raising me and Tommy in the family home, Mom saw herself as only a part-time spouse. She had decided that if Jeff truly loved her, he would accept her choices, emphasizing that he had no other choice because he was a good guy. Mom believed that if he cared about being a good husband, he would comply with her decisions. For her, the external factors in her life weren't supposed to impact their relationship, and Jeff simply had to cope with it. Mom claimed it didn't imply she loved him any less, and wasn't truly depriving him of anything. She urged her mom to understand and mentioned feeling dizzy and sick, but insisted she wasn't done. Following Jeff, Mom entered a relationship with Danny, seeking a more open-ended dynamic since she knew she would spend time away from the marriage. Danny was open to having other partners, essentially cheating on Mom, and she turned a blind eye to it, considering it her penance. Though she didn't precisely love him, Mom married Danny, and their arrangement persisted for a while. As time passed and her children grew older, Mom felt neglected and intentionally sought attention elsewhere. She reasoned that if an open marriage was acceptable for Danny, then it should be acceptable for her. Feeling she wasn't impacting Danny, Mom believed he would afford her the same leniency she had given him for the past 6 or 7 years. However, she misjudged the situation. As the end approached, Mom initiated things with Glenn. Mom insisted on sharing these details to make her daughter see the recurring pattern in her relationships. Describing Glenn as the best of her husband since Dad, Mom acknowledged that she took him for granted, assuming he would forgive her regardless of her actions. The most significant argument occurred after Emma's wedding, where Mom essentially ignored Glenn while focusing on reconciling with Dad for closure. Jim had to point out that Mom wasn't tending to her husband, treating Glenn with the same disregard she had shown to Dad, Jeff, and Danny. Mom openly wept as she shared this part of her story. I could only gaze at my mother, absorbing the emotional weight of the revelation. My arms trembled as I urgently struggled my way to the bathroom, barely reaching the toilet before emptying my stomach into the bowl. My mom stood by me, holding my hair as I retched. She tried to console me, sharing her own mistakes, regrets, and misguided choices. In her words, she unfolded tales of broken marriages, selfish decisions, and a repeating pattern of seeking temporary solace outside the commitment she had made. She spoke of her own weaknesses, acknowledging her selfish and thoughtless nature. As my mother revealed the narrative of her tangled relationships, I couldn't help but see echoes of my own life, shadows of the choices I was on the brink of making. She spoke of wearing a blue dress, seeking attention, and taking her husband's for granted. It was as if she was painting a cautionary tale, a mirror reflecting my current struggles and the potential consequences of my actions. My head was as churned up as my belly. The weight of her words hit me harder than I expected. She described a cycle of self-destruction, a path I seemed poised to follow. The realization was both unnerving and awakening. In her tearful confessions, my mother admitted marrying Dagnow to spare him from the pain she had inflicted on her previous husbands. I comforted her, trying to offer support amid the emotional storm. Yet, as the stories unfolded, I couldn't escape the confrontation with my own reflection in her words. When she veered into my current situation, warning me of the consequences of my actions and the impact on Bradley, I felt a surge of nausea. The weight of truth, regret, and impending decisions overwhelmed me, and I staggered, collapsing onto the cold bathroom floor. The room spun, not just from the physical sickness, but from the emotional whirlwind that had gripped me. My mother's stories, a tapestry of missteps and heartbreaks, had wrapped around me, leaving me entangled in the consequences of her choices and the potential echoes in my own life. Struggling urgently to reach the bathroom, my arms trembled as I barely made it to the toilet, retching with Mom by my side, holding my hair. She encouraged me to let out all the bad stuff, emphasizing the realization of the consequences of burning down one's own life repeatedly. Mom expressed a strong desire for me not to follow the same path. In the midst of my emotional and physical distress, I questioned my own actions, berating myself for the poor choices I had made. I acknowledged the warnings, particularly from Bradley, and condemned myself for not heeding them. The harsh self-talk included doubts about deserving my husband, love, and the happy home with Braylon and Caden. The fear of following in my mother's footsteps was evident, and I chastised myself for what I perceived as a destructive pattern in relationships. The tirade ended with a bleak prediction of ending up alone after several meaningless marriages in a similar kind of hell. After what felt like 9 years of that, Mom gave me some mouthwash and made me eat 2 more cookies. She said the ginger would settle my stomach. She brushed my hair and let me change my clothes. I didn't even have to go into the bag I'd packed. We're the same size. I could wear any of her clothes. So she gave me some comfy sweats and kids. She bundled me in her car and drove me 2 miles to Tommy and Bernice's house. She's all cried out. Mom informed my brother about my condition as she took care of me, expressing that I now understood the consequences of my actions. She instructed him to put me straight to bed, and she would join them for pancakes whenever I managed to get up and gather myself. Grateful, my brother thanked her and explained that Jonathan and the baby were currently asleep, a precious moment they took advantage of whenever possible. Mom kissed him, expressing love, and mentioned seeing him at a more decent hour. Tom guided me inside and directed me to the nursery room, mentioning they weren't using it yet. Little Lila was peacefully asleep with her mother in the master bedroom, nestled in a crib-like extension beside their bed. Tom assured me that he wouldn't lecture me, acknowledging that our mom had probably done enough of that. He understood that I would spend the night processing everything, hoping I could get some sleep. Before concluding, he felt the need to share something about Bradley, clarifying that he hadn't spoken to him since I left. Despite acknowledging that I knew Bradley better, he wanted to emphasize something he might not have seen in him before. In a brother-to-brother-in-law manner, Tom revealed that Bradley was a fighter. He elaborated on Bradley's background as an Olympic fencer who worked as a combat consultant and choreographer for movies and theater productions, emphasizing Bradley's real understanding of a genuine bout, despite making things appear flashy and spectacular. As he referred to Bradley as a fighter, the weight of the words echoed through my thoughts. My brother painted a vivid picture of Bradley's commitment to me and our family, likening him to a warrior, a Navy SEAL, a force to be reckoned with. Despite Bradley's lack of combat experience, my brother emphasized the unwavering determination and protective instincts he held for us. It was a powerful message, a reassurance that Bradley would go to great lengths to keep us safe and united. The gravity of my brother's warning settled in, a stark reminder that attempting anything like my recent struggles would be futile. Bradley, armed with knowledge and a deep commitment, would not be deceived. My brother's intervention had shed light on Bradley's awareness, and I felt a mix of gratitude and relief. In a surprising revelation, my brother shared that our father had warned Bradley about potential challenges before we got married. It was a preemptive son-in-law talk, offering a unique perspective on marriage and human nature. The conversation highlighted the lengths my family had gone to, preparing for the possibility of me straying down a destructive path. As my brother expressed his willingness to intervene and support me, I couldn't help but feel a sense of security. He kissed my forehead, offering a brotherly protection that brought comfort and reassurance. That night, I slept soundly, the weight of the revelations and the emotional turmoil of the past days beginning to lift. The next morning, the familiar chaos of family life greeted me, a mix of energetic children, misplaced shoes, and unbrushed teeth. It felt different in this new setting, but there was a hint of nostalgia for the earlier, more hectic days of parenting. As we gathered for breakfast, I couldn't help but admire my brother's family. Bernice, his wife, embodied grace and beauty, effortlessly balancing motherhood with her gymnast's physique and delicate Belgian accent. My brother's protective instincts extended to her, ensuring a haven of security for their family. The pancakes served that morning were not just a breakfast. They carried the flavor of emotional release and the optimism for better days. The conversation navigated away from past troubles, allowing us to share moments of joy and connection. Later, as Mom drove my car to meet us, the mention of a little something in the back caught my attention. She revealed it was her blue dress, a symbolic gesture of letting go. Despite its outdated style, she believed in its comeback, a hopeful reminder that even after facing the shadows of the past, there could be a resurgence of brighter days. "I suppose we could classify it as vintage," Mom said with a slight half-shrug. "You're an adult, a beautiful one. You'll make your own decisions. Do what you want with it. Just please, try not to repeat my mistakes. Don't use it to break your husband's heart. And for heaven's sake, never let your father catch you wearing it. It would surely give him a heart attack." "I won't, Mom. Thank you. Have a safe journey home. I love you." "Love you too. Thank you. Thanks for everything." Before starting the car, I sent 2 messages. In the first message to Richard, I canceled my trip to Chicago, instructing him to cancel the plane tickets, the booked room, and the conference registration, seeking a refund for the fee. I suggested finding someone else for his plans and expressed anger for threatening my marriage and family, almost ruining my life. I demanded no further communication except in a professional context, which should be kept to a minimum. I warned him to avoid my husband and brother for his own safety, as they were aware of everything. In the second message to Bradley, I apologized for the situation and regretted causing worry. I acknowledged acting without considering him and promised never to contemplate such actions again. I pledged never to take him for granted, to never underestimate him, and always prioritize him. I thanked him for intervening and vowed to be the one to stop myself from now on, understanding the family history. I expressed deep love for him and recognized that he deserved better than the neglect, disrespect, and foolishness I had shown. I solemnly promised never to repeat such behavior. As I embarked on the journey home, a realization struck me about what to do with Mom's blue dress. I decided to destroy the garment.
Story 3.
They say you don't notice the moment things start to fall apart. It's not one big explosion, not some dramatic event. It's a slow unraveling, a series of tiny shifts that only make sense in hindsight. Looking back, I wish I had paid more attention to the details. The way Alicia's laughter had changed, becoming lighter, more distant. The way she started getting ready for nights out with an excitement that hadn't been there before. The way she had stopped reaching for me in the middle of the night. Our marriage hadn't always been like this. We used to be the couple people envied, the ones who couldn't keep their hands off each other, who shared inside jokes and knew exactly what the other was thinking with just a glance. I used to feel like the luckiest man alive, coming home to a woman who looked at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. But somewhere along the way, life happened. Work became exhausting, the kids drained every ounce of energy we had, and the moments we used to steal for ourselves slowly disappeared. We still loved each other, I was sure of that, but love wasn't always enough. The night before everything changed, I found myself awake at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling while Alicia slept beside me. The room was quiet except for her soft breathing, but my mind was loud, replaying moments I hadn't thought twice about before. The way she had started leaving for errands, dressed just a little nicer than usual, how her phone was always face down on the counter, the shift in the way she spoke to me, still loving, still warm, but with a hesitation that hadn't been there before. I told myself I was imagining things, but the unease sat heavy in my chest, refusing to let me sleep. The next morning, Alicia was already up before me, sipping coffee at the kitchen table, lost in thought. I stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment before she noticed me. "Morning," she said, offering a small smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. I almost asked her then, "Are we okay?" But the words never left my mouth. Instead, I kissed her temple, grabbed my keys, and left for work, convincing myself that I was overthinking, that our love, our history, was unshakable, that nothing could come between us. But deep down, I already knew. I was about to lose something I wasn't ready to let go of. By the time my wife and I arrived at the Halloween party, it was already in full throttle. The music pounded through the walls, elaborate decorations transformed the space, and the energy buzzed with excitement. The moment I stepped inside, my gaze immediately landed on Alicia. Dressed in a sleek, form-fitting Catwoman costume, she exuded confidence, the dark material accentuating her toned figure while leaving just enough to the imagination. Even after 2 kids who were spending the weekend with my parents, she still looked as breathtaking as the day we first met. I didn't always stop to appreciate just how beautiful she was, but tonight it was impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, my own costume left much to be desired. I'd gone with a basic pirate ensemble, not particularly creative and definitely not seductive, but at least I didn't look completely ridiculous. I felt decent enough in my outfit, though standing next to Alicia, who effortlessly commanded attention, I might as well have been invisible. She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek before disappearing into a conversation with friends, leaving me momentarily on my own. With nothing better to do, I made my way to the drinks table, where a heated debate was already underway among my buddies. Animated voices, exaggerated gestures. It was clear they were deep into one of those never-ending geek arguments. The topic? The age-old question. Who would win in a fight, Hulk or Superman? I sighed. Of all the things to discuss at a party, this was their fixation. The answer was obvious. Superman, no contest. Why was this even a debate? Still, I couldn't resist getting involved. Years of devouring Marvel and DC comics as a kid had given me enough knowledge to settle this once and for all. Or so I thought. Instead of resolving anything, my input only added fuel to the fire. Voices grew louder, hand gestures became more dramatic, and suddenly, we were a bunch of grown men regressing into teenage nerds, arguing passionately about superheroes, throwing in jokes, and shoving each other playfully. Surrounded by sultry nurses, seductive catwomen, and an array of revealing costumes, you'd think we'd have more interesting distractions. But no, the battle between Hulk and Superman had us completely hooked. Eventually, we had to call a ceasefire. Too much booze, too much noise, and too much partying left to waste the entire night arguing over fictional characters. I had already decided to take it easy on the drinking, since Alicia had no intention of being our designated driver. From across the room, I spotted her lounging on the couch with her best friend Susie, who, unsurprisingly, was also dressed as Catwoman. They had been inseparable since middle school, practically carbon copies of each other in everything from mannerisms to fashion sense. Their families even joked that one of them had been secretly switched at birth. Alicia and Susie, however, never found that joke amusing. Susie had married Dominic 2 years before Alicia and I tied the knot. Given how similar she and Alicia were, you might assume their husbands would be alike. That assumption couldn't be more wrong. I managed a group of restaurants, a demanding job that required leadership, but not a suit and tie. I wasn't a pushover. I played baseball in high school and took up boxing in college. Sure, my gym visits had dwindled since settling into family life, but I wasn't out of shape. Dominic, on the other hand, worked in a factory, spending hours every day lifting heavy equipment. The guy practically lived at the gym, and it showed. He was built like a gladiator. Where I kept my hair short and neat, he sported long hair tied back in a ponytail, paired with a thick beard that gave him the look of an ancient warrior. If I was more of a Don Draper type, he was Khal Drogo. I never had anything against him, but we had nothing in common. He was just Susie's husband, and since Susie was Alicia's best friend, our paths crossed occasionally. That was the extent of our relationship. Tonight, though, he had gone all in, showing up as Tarzan, in freezing weather, just a loincloth. It was ridiculous. Classic Dominic, always seeking attention. As expected, he was in his element, surrounded by women, effortlessly charming them with flirtatious remarks and teasing gestures. He did this at every party, pushing the boundaries just enough to keep it playful, but never quite crossing the line. And the women adored it. They laughed, blushed, leaned in closer, even Alicia. That irked me. I would have expected Susie, of all people, to disapprove of his antics. If the roles were reversed, I knew Alicia wouldn't tolerate it. But Susie just laughed along with the others, occasionally swatting his arm playfully instead of shutting it down. If anything, she seemed amused by how much attention he got. The more Dominic drank, the bolder he became, his flirting becoming more blatant, his hands lingering just a bit too long. A few husbands looked visibly uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. Maybe they were intimidated, maybe too drunk, maybe they just didn't want to cause a scene. I didn't care. I only knew one thing. If he so much as looked at Alicia the wrong way, we were leaving. As if sensing my irritation, Alicia suddenly appeared beside me. "Enjoying yourself, Greg?" she asked over the music. I nodded, taking a slow sip of my beer. She swayed slightly to the rhythm, her gaze flicking toward Dominic, watching him, admiring him. Something in my chest tightened. I didn't want her to look at him like that. I didn't want her to find him attractive. A sharp pang of jealousy settled in my stomach. "What kind of idiot wears a loincloth in this weather?" I muttered. Alicia snapped out of her thoughts and smirked. "You know, Dominic, he thrives on attention." I chuckled, but my beer suddenly tasted bitter. She caught the change in my mood and grinned. "Oh, don't tell me you're jealous," I scoffed. "Jealous? Of him? I don't need to strip down to get noticed." She laughed lightly, brushing off my reaction. "Of course not, honey." But then her gaze drifted back toward Dominic. As the night wore on, the party turned into a whirlwind of loud laughter, drunken conversations, and wild dancing. The booze flowed freely, lowering inhibitions and amplifying the chaos. Eventually, I forgot about Dominic and his absurd outfit, losing myself in the atmosphere. Until something changed. I hadn't seen Alicia in a while. A nagging sense of unease crept in. I scanned the room, searching for her, but she wasn't anywhere in sight. After a few minutes, I decided to go find her. I found her in the kitchen, with Dominic. They stood close, speaking in hushed tones, closer than I liked. A flicker of possessiveness surged through me. Dominic noticed me first, immediately stepping back. Alicia turned toward me, her expression shifting too quickly into a forced smile. "There you are," she said, her voice just a little too bright. "I was just coming to find you." I narrowed my eyes. "Really? I've been in the same spot all night." She hesitated for a fraction of a second before covering it up with an easy shrug. Dominic took the opportunity to slip away, leaving us alone. Alicia stepped toward me, her voice softer now. "Are you upset, babe?" I exhaled slowly, not in the mood for games. "What were you two talking about?" She rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, you know how he is. He's just flirty. Always has been. You're reading too much into it." My jaw tightened. "That's what you're going with?" For a brief moment, she looked amused, then sighed. "I may have had a bit too much to drink. Don't mind me." Then, with a casual pat on my cheek, she walked away. For the rest of the night, I never saw them together again. But the lingering glances didn't stop. Maybe they were meaningless, or maybe they meant everything. Either way, they left a sick feeling in my gut. Needing a breather, I made my way upstairs to use the bathroom. As I stepped out, I found Dominic waiting for me. "You got a problem with me, Greg?" he slurred, eyes narrowed with drunken hostility. I frowned. "What?" He took a step closer, swaying slightly. "You always act like you're better than me. With your fancy car, your big house, like I'm beneath you." His words were thick with booze, his tone laced with resentment. I let out a slow breath. "You're drunk. Go home before you say something you'll regret." He smirked, his expression turning sharp, almost cruel. "Regret? Like telling you how good your wife is in bed?" My blood went ice cold. I stepped in, my voice low, steady. "Shut your mouth before I shut it for you." Dominic let out a dark chuckle, his eyes gleaming with something sinister. "Fantasies are things that never happened, Greg. I've got memories." His words hit like a sledgehammer to the chest. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. Then my fist moved before my brain even caught up. The impact sent him reeling, his head snapping back with a sickening crunch as he stumbled into the drywall, leaving a deep dent as he collapsed. I didn't wait to see if he got up. I turned and stormed downstairs, my vision blurring with pure rage. The sounds of the party faded into the background, drowned out by the pounding in my ears, and then I saw her, Alicia. Our eyes met, and in that moment I saw everything. Guilt, fear, panic. "Greg, what?" She stopped mid-sentence. She didn't need to finish. The answer was all over my face. A shriek cut through the room. "Oh my God! Someone call an ambulance! Dominic's not moving!" I barely registered it. I just kept staring at Alicia, searching for something, anything, that still felt familiar. Had I ever really known her? The chaos erupted around me. People ran for the stairs. And then there was Susie, Dominic's wife, her voice slicing through the noise. "What the hell did you do to my husband?" Then came the blows, her fists slamming into my back, wild and furious. I barely felt them. Someone pulled her away, and Richard, our host, stepped between us. "Greg, what the hell is going on?" I ignored him. My focus was locked on Susie. My voice came out disturbingly calm. "Did you know?" She blinked. "What?" Did you know he was screwing my wife?" The words hung in the air like a bang. She didn't yell, didn't deny it. She just stood there staring at me with an expression that made my stomach twist, like she had always known. Alicia grabbed my arm. "Greg, we need to talk, but not here." I turned to her, my entire body shaking with barely contained fury, the kind that burns white hot, leaving only destruction in its wake. Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't from sadness. They were the only thing holding me together. "He's coming around!" someone shouted. Susie bolted up the stairs. But I couldn't bring myself to care. All I could think about was what I had just done. One punch, one stupid, reckless moment. I could have just ruined my entire life. Attack charges, jail time, everything I had built, gone, because of a drunken fool. Alicia clutched my arm tighter. "Greg, please, let's just go home." I turned to her, my voice devoid of emotion. "No, you can go home with your boyfriend and his wife. I'm leaving." I pushed past her, heading straight for the door. "Greg!" She chased after me, grabbing at my jacket. "You're not leaving me here. We need to talk." Her face was streaked with tears, but her anger burned just beneath the surface. What the hell did she have to be mad about? She was the one who cheated. I exhaled sharply. "I can't do this right now, Alicia. Don't come home." My voice was empty, detached. I might already be facing charges for knocking out that idiot. I don't need domestic violence added to the list. Her expression darkened. "Screw you, Greg. Screw you." Her voice cracked as she stepped closer, eyes blazing with a fury that almost matched my own. "You want to knock me too? Go ahead. Maybe then you'd actually acknowledge me for once. God, at least then you'd be touching me." Her words hit like a sucker punch to the gut. I clenched my fists. "That's your excuse? I don't fall at your feet every damn night, so you screw around behind my back. That's your justification." She didn't respond, but she didn't need to. Her defiant stare told me everything. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "For the record, Alicia, I work my A off to provide for this family. Maybe if you had a real job, you'd understand what it's like to come home exhausted." That's when I realized we had an audience, and they were hanging onto every word. Alicia let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Oh, poor Greg. Too tired for his wife, but not too tired to sit in front of his laptop watching adult films every damn night. Silence, heavy, suffocating. She wasn't done. "Maybe if you actually paid attention to the real woman in your bed instead of fantasizing about fake ones, I wouldn't have had to cry to my best friend about how my own husband doesn't want me anymore." Her voice cracked. Her hands trembled at her sides. Anger, hurt. But for me, it was the final nail in the coffin. I had never felt so humiliated. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My throat was dry, my mind blank, and I could feel their stares. Friends, neighbors, people I had known for years, some in shock, some in disgust, some in quiet amusement, entertained by the drama unfolding before them. I had no choice but to walk away. I turned, stepping out into the cold night air. Behind me, Alicia's voice rang out one last time, chasing me as I started the car and drove off into the darkness. And just like that, everything I thought I knew about my life shattered into pieces I'd never be able to put back together. This narrative is influenced by true events. In case you're curious, no, I'm not Greg. I'm Richard, the guy who hosted the Halloween party. Yes, I'm the one dealing with the Dominic-shaped hole in my wall, the one disturbingly close to my daughter's bedroom. I chose to share this story from Greg's perspective because I wanted to capture his emotions, the fury, the embarrassment, the sting of betrayal. To do that, I had to imagine myself in his shoes. Since that chaotic night, my wife and I haven't stopped dissecting it. It's become a recurring topic in our household. Maybe it's unhealthy to get so absorbed in someone else's drama, but witnessing it unfold was like watching a car crash. You just couldn't look away. And we weren't the only ones left with questions. Susie, Greg's wife, wasn't angry when he revealed Alicia's affair with Dominic. She didn't even seem surprised. So she already knew. But how? Was it some kind of arrangement? Something else? Let's be real. A ménage à trois involving those two would rival any adult film. How long had this been going on? Thinking back, I now recall noticing the way Alicia and Dominic exchanged glances that night. There was definitely an undercurrent. Am I reading too much into it? Or maybe I'm not. One thing is clear. Greg neglected Alicia, not just physically, but emotionally too. Does that justify infidelity? No. But does it provide some context? Absolutely. When a woman feels consistently rejected, the temptation to look elsewhere increases, especially when her husband shows more interest in other women, whether in person or on a screen. Even adult films can cross the line into betrayal if it makes a partner feel unwanted. By the way, Alicia is stunning in real life. Honestly, any man with a pulse would be drawn to her. But this situation proves an age-old saying. For every gorgeous woman, there's a man tired of being with her. The bigger question is, what happens now? For now, everyone involved is keeping quiet. But secrets like these never stay hidden forever. It's only a matter of time. Although this account is based on real events, I wasn't present for everything. I didn't witness the conversation between Greg and Dominic before the fight. I only heard secondhand accounts. So I took some creative liberties. I can't claim to know Greg's exact thoughts that night, but I can imagine what mine would have been. I empathized with him. Alicia betrayed him. Regardless of her reasons, it was a deep betrayal. Could I forgive something like that? Or would it lead to divorce? Honestly, I'm not sure. Of course, I'm not impartial. Greg's a good friend. And by the way, he was absolutely right. Superman would annihilate the Hulk. Heat vision, flight, super speed. It's no contest unless kryptonite is involved. But I digress. Mr. Kirkson, there's a call on line 1, my assistant announced. I shook off my train of thought. Who is it, Betty? It's Mr. Ford, sir. Greg. I'd been trying to reach him since that disastrous night at my Halloween party. But until now, radio silence from all 4 of them. Naturally, I had questions, countless questions. That night had it all. Lust, violence, treachery, a spectacle of drama, a modern-day David and Goliath. Except this time, Goliath had a weak jaw, and David was fueled by pure rage. Put him through, Betty. Sir, he sounds upset. Well, of course he's upset, I scoffed. His wife humiliated him in front of everyone. If he wasn't upset, I'd be concerned. The line clicked as the call connected. Greg, hey, man, I've been trying to reach you since... I don't want to hear it. His voice was quiet, controlled, but underneath I heard it, a slow, simmering anger. The kind that doesn't explode, it chokes. Even over the phone, his emotions were palpable. They hung in the silence, heavy and oppressive. So, do you want to talk? I asked cautiously. He laughed, but it wasn't out of amusement. It was short, sharp, almost a sneer. Why the hell would I want to talk to you, Richard? My so-called friend. Sarcasm dripped from his words. What's next? Are you planning to write a sequel to your little story? Keep your audience updated on how the fool who couldn't satisfy his wife is holding up? Damn, he'd read my story. Now, in addition to being furious with his unfaithful wife, her backstabbing best friend, and her brutish lover, Greg was mad at me too. Great. Greg and I went way back to high school. He played baseball, I played football. Different crowds, but we struck up a solid friendship. After graduation, we drifted apart. He went to college and I joined the Air Force. Years later, when I returned home, we reconnected like no time had passed. Greg worked his way up from managing an Olive Garden to overseeing multiple locations as a district manager. Meanwhile, I spent a decade in the Air Force before transitioning into a civilian role with a private contractor. Our lives had taken different paths, but our bond remained strong until now. Today, Greg was seething with anger. Not good. Normally, I'd try to diffuse the tension with humor, but this wasn't the time. I especially liked the ending, Greg interrupted before I could say anything. I stayed silent. You know, the part where I tuck my tail and run like a coward? Nice touch. His words cut deep. In that moment, I felt like the worst friend imaginable. There was no defense. Greg, where are you? We need to talk. You know what's funny, Richard? His tone dropped, sending chills down my spine. I've never been more popular. Everyone wants to talk to me. Must be my magnetic personality. Then I heard it. His voice was slurred. The distinct sound of liquid pouring into a glass, ice clinking. Greg, are you drunk? A humorless laugh escaped him. No, Richard. I was drunk an hour ago. Now, who the hell knows what I am? Damn it. I was a lousy friend. I could admit that. But now, I had to fix this. Where are you, Greg? I grabbed my coat and keys. Work could wait. This couldn't. Screw you, Richard. He spat coldly. I'm not telling you where I am. Don't even think about looking for me. If you do, I swear I'll make you regret it. The line went dead. It didn't matter. I already knew where he was. Greg had a favorite bar, Moe's. He liked it for the barmaid, Karen. She was friendly but firm about her boundaries, which only made her more appealing. When I arrived, my stomach dropped. Greg was at the bar, alone. The place was nearly empty. I glanced at my watch. Just past noon. Karen noticed me first and waved. Her expression was concerned, despite the forced smile. Is he yours? She asked, nodding toward Greg. I nodded. Yeah, give me a second. Greg, I began. His fist came out of nowhere. A crack echoed, and my vision blurred. Jesus, no wonder Dominic went through the wall. I hit the floor, tasting blood as I wiped my mouth. Greg stood over me, his chest heaving, fists clenched. After a moment, he exhaled sharply, turned back to the bar, and slumped onto his stool. I pushed myself up slowly, signaling to Karen, who had paused mid-wipe, her eyes wide with alarm. She looked like she was debating whether to intervene, but I gave her a small nod. It was under control. She hesitated for a moment before stepping back, still watching closely. I let out a deep breath, slid onto the stool next to Greg, and ran a hand over my aching jaw. Feel better now? Greg took a slow sip of his beer before shaking his head. This off the record? He asked, sarcasm dripping from his voice. I smirked. At least he wasn't completely out of it. That was something. Where'd you stop, Mother? He muttered bitterly. I frowned. What? He sighed, swirling his drink. You and your mom get along? You've met my mom, Greg. Yeah. Still remember how she patted me down to make sure I wasn't sneaking anything into her house. We both chuckled at the memory. Then his expression darkened again. For the love of God, Richard, he muttered. Living through that night was bad enough. Then I had to read about it, knowing everyone else knew it was about me. I sighed. Greg, I just told the story. It wasn't about embarrassing you. Besides, nobody knows it's you. He turned to me slowly, giving me a pointed look. 2 cat women and a pirate, he said flatly. Oh, and a pirate who threw Tarzan through a wall. How many Halloween parties do you think had that exact sequence of events? I opened my mouth. Closed it. Okay, fair point. Greg clenched his jaw, his hands curling into fists. For a second, I thought he might take another swing at me. You think this is funny? I raised my hands in surrender. No, I said quickly. You're right, Greg. I was an idiot. I shouldn't have put you in that situation, and I'm sorry. He exhaled sharply. Well, I'm not sorry for decking you, I grinned, rubbing my sore jaw. Yeah, well, you still kick like a wimp. No wonder you always got your A kicked in boxing. That did it. The tension finally cracked, the ice melting between us. Minutes later, I had him out of the bar and into my car. As we were leaving, Karen caught my arm, pulling me into a quick hug. Take care of him, Richard, she murmured. He's been through hell. My jaw was still throbbing, already swelling, but I had Greg with me. That was what mattered. By the time I got him strapped into the passenger seat, he was already out cold, like he hadn't slept in days. Instead of taking him to his mom's, I brought him home. On the drive, I made a call. John. What's up, Richie Rich? Came the familiar, too cheerful voice. John was the kind of guy who never really left his 20s behind. Great friend, but immature as hell. The type of guy wives gave the side eye whenever their husbands spent too much time with him. He was also the one who had started the Hulk versus Superman argument at the party. John, I need a hand. Found Greg at Moe's, wasted. Need help getting him inside. Damn, glad you found him. After what that woman pulled, I half expected him to put a bullet in his head. Minutes later, John pulled up behind my SUV and we got to work. Hauling 200 pounds of unconscious weight wasn't easy, but we managed to get Greg onto the couch in my basement. We talked for a bit before John left, making me promise to keep him updated. With Greg passed out, I found myself in a rare, quiet house. I didn't want to leave in case he woke up confused, so I made the most of it. Grilled a steak, baked a couple of potatoes, flipped through the sports channels, and settled on a documentary. Not long after, my wife Nikki walked in with the kids. You're home early, she noted, kissing my cheek. The kids barely acknowledged me before dashing upstairs. I found Greg at Moe's completely trashed. Brought him back here. He's knocked out in the basement. Her expression shifted, concern mixed with unease. Are you sure that's a good idea? I don't want the kids around that. He'll be fine, Nikki. I'll keep an eye on him. She reached up to touch my face, but I instinctively flinched. That's when she noticed the swelling. Richard, what the hell? Did he touch you? I'm fine. Don't worry about it. Rich, I don't like this. Get him out of here. Honey, the guy just found out very publicly that his wife was cheating. He lost it. Who wouldn't? And he's been dealing with it alone. If that means I take a hit or two, so be it. I smirked. Besides, my jaw's a little tougher than Tarzan's. He might want to rethink his costume next year. That got a laugh. Watching Tarzan get his A handed to him by a pirate was actually hilarious. I doubt Jane was amused. No, she admitted, grinning. But Tarzan definitely got what was coming to him. Dominic should spend less time lifting weights and more time practicing his punches. Nikki snorted. Or at least learning how to dodge. We chuckled, and for a brief moment, things felt normal again. Later, I checked in on Greg. His thunderous snoring confirmed he was alive, if nothing else. I grabbed a pillow and shoved it under his head, immediately regretting it. The stench of booze hit me like a brick wall. "What the hell, Greg?" I muttered, gagging. I needed fresh air. Hours later, a zombie-like figure shuffled into the kitchen. Bloodshot eyes, face full of regret. Nikki took one look at him and shot me a silent handle, "This, or he's out look." I sighed and stood up. "How you feeling, man?" he groaned. "Like my wife cheated on me, embarrassed me in front of everyone, and then ran me over with a semi-truck. Well, at least your memory's intact. 2 out of 3 ain't bad." His tired eyes narrowed. "Oh, my memory's just fine." He sighed. "I also remember your damn story." I rubbed my jaw. "Do you also remember punching me in the face because of it?" He frowned. "That part's fuzzy. You might need to jog my memory." There was no real hostility in his voice. "Greg, I really am sorry. I didn't expect so many people to see that post. And I definitely didn't think you'd find out." "Well, you were wrong." He ran a hand through his hair. "A bunch of people read it. Some guy even messaged me, saying he heard about the party from a friend, then came across your story online." "Who?" "You wouldn't know him. Some guy named Harry from Virginia." I burst out laughing. "Harry Inva?" Greg's eyebrows shot up. "Wait, you know Harry?" "Of course. Have you met him?" Greg rolled his eyes. "Yeah, loudmouth, but a decent guy once you get past the ego. Oh, and by the way, he took my side." "And?" I smirked. "He thinks I'm an a-hole?" Greg cracked a smile. "Pretty sure he thought that before reading your story." I chuckled. Greg nodded, finally letting out a real, genuine laugh, the first I had heard from him in weeks. I clapped him on the back, and this time he didn't flinch or tense up. That was progress. "Richard, why the hell did you make me look like a coward in your story? Did I really just take off, like some scared little punk?" "Greg, you dropped that guy with one punch. I half expected you to go full Mike Tyson and bite his ear off. If you'd fought like that in college, you'd have been a champion. Nobody thinks you're weak." "Yeah, well, screw you. It was just a hobby," he muttered. "Idiot." Then finally, he grinned and shook his head. "I really laid him out, huh?" A flicker of pride crossed his face. "Damn right. I bet your weak A couldn't do that," he teased. "Nope," I admitted. "I'd need at least 2 hits." That finally did it. He laughed, and for the first time since that disastrous night, he looked like himself again. "Rich, what happened after I left?" I kept expecting the cops to show up. I leaned against the counter and let out a long breath. "You want the recap of Halloween? The aftermath?" The second you tore out of there, Alicia collapsed, sobbing like she'd just been sentenced to life in prison, full-on hysterics. It was surreal, watching a woman in a Catwoman suit have a complete breakdown in front of a room full of people. Nikki rushed over, got her onto the couch. Meanwhile, the other Catwoman, Susie, was half-carrying Tarzan, a.k.a. Dominic, down the stairs. The guy was a mess, clutching his head while his wife practically dragged him. He was finished. Greg exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "Yeah, well, he had it coming. No argument there." But Alicia, the moment she saw them together, she lost it. I swear, one second she was crying, and the next, she was lunging. Her voice had cut through the room like a whip. "You selfish fool! What the hell did you say to Greg? You ruined everything, you piece of crap!" Dominic, already humiliated and probably concussed, suddenly had to dodge a furious woman in leather and heels. Susie immediately threw herself between them. "Alicia, stop! Cut it out!" she yelled, shielding her husband. Dominic didn't even try to defend himself. The fact that his wife had to step in and protect him from his mistress just made him look even worse. But Alicia wasn't done. She kept shouting. "You had to open your mouth, huh? You couldn't just let it go? What the hell is wrong with you?" Greg stared at the table, shaking his head. Jesus. Dominic just stood there, looking like it was finally sinking in, like he was just now realizing how bad he'd screwed up. I think that punch knocked some sense into him. He knew he was the reason everything had fallen apart. And then, in true pathetic form, Dominic mumbled, "Alicia, I'm sorry, I was drunk." The second the words left his mouth, Alicia crumpled to the floor again. "What the hell am I supposed to do now, Susie?" she sobbed. "What am I supposed to do?" Greg let out a bitter chuckle. "Yeah. Well, that's her problem to figure out." I nodded. After that, they had to haul Dominic off to the ER. Turns out you literally knocked some sense into him. You gave him a concussion. Greg's lip twitched. but there was no real amusement in it. Good. He actually wanted to press charges, but Susie and Alicia shut it down. Apparently, Alicia begged him not to. She knew that if you got arrested, there'd be zero chance of ever getting you back. Greg let out a dry, humorless laugh. There's no chance of that anyway. I nodded. So, what about you? You just disappeared. We heard your tires screech, your engine roar, and then nothing. I wanted to follow you, but my SUV was blocked in. I was honestly afraid you might wreck. Greg sighed. I had to get out of there. I needed to breathe. Think, process it. I couldn't deal with all those eyes on me, watching, whispering, judging. I just needed space. So you went to your mom's place. He let out another sigh. Yeah. You know things were bad if I actually went back there. Damn it. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I sped through side streets, ignoring stop signs, traffic lights, and speed limits. I had no destination, just the need to get away. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the glowing screen. Alicia's name, her face, a picture I had once adored. Now, a lie. I remembered taking that photo back when I was head over heels, completely devoted. And for what? So she could sleep with Dominic, kiss him, run her hands over him the way she used to with me? The thought made me sick. The phone rang again and again. I snapped. I yanked the battery out and tossed the useless device onto the seat. Finally, silence. No more lies. I drove, lost in my own torment. Visions of her and Dominic wrapped up in each other, playing like a damn movie I couldn't shut off. Then suddenly I eased off the gas. I blinked. And there it was, my parents' house. I had no memory of the drive. My subconscious had brought me home. I turned off the engine, exhaled, and stepped out. No matter how far kids go, they always keep a key to their childhood home, just in case. Inside, nothing had changed. Same couch, same lamp, same coffee table. My world had crumbled, but this place remained frozen in time. A voice cut through the silence. Who's there? My mom, sharp, alert. I could picture her now, gripping something heavy, ready to defend herself. It's me, Ma! A pause. Then, Gregory? Yeah. The hallway light flicked on, making me squint. For God's sake, why are you sneaking around? Trying to give me a heart attack? Nice to see you too, Mom. She appeared, petite, dressed in floral pajamas, tight curlers in her hair. She studied me, frowning. Why do you look like an idiot? Ah, right. The pirate costume. I had forgotten. Most of it was gone, but the tattered shirt and boots remained. No wonder she was confused. Long night, I muttered. I'm staying here for a bit. The kids come home tomorrow, but I'll be back after that. I'll explain later. Just not in front of them. No emotions, no speeches, just a fact. That's how our family worked. She gave me a once-over, then nodded. You know where everything is. She turned, disappearing down the hall. And lock the damn door! The next morning, I turned my phone back on. 29 missed calls, 15 from Alicia, a few from Richard, some from other partygoers. None of them mattered. Half were checking in out of nosy curiosity. The rest probably felt sorry for me. I had bigger concerns. Was Dominic in the hospital? Had he pressed charges? Was I about to be arrested? I left before my mom woke up, scribbling a note on the counter. Left early. If Alicia calls, tell her I'll reach out when I'm ready. She can take the kids if she wants. If not, I'll bring them home later. It was Sunday. No work. I needed something strong. So I went to the bar. The weeks blurred together after that. I crashed at my mom's, only leaving to see the kids. Alicia and I barely spoke. At first she tried, but I shut her down. She left frustrated, her eyes red from tears. One night as I was heading out, I overheard her on the phone. Not with Dominic, with Susie. Was that better? I didn't know. I spent my free time between my mom's place and the bar. My dad was out of town, so it was just the two of us. She didn't push for details, just asked what I planned to do. I shrugged. No clue. Her response? You'll figure it out. That was it. No lectures, no forced conversations, just quiet understanding. I called in sick, took some personal days. I wasn't ready to face the world. Even though no one from work had been at the party, word spread. Small-town gossip. I wasn't just the guy with a cheating wife. I was the guy whose marriage imploded in public. Poor Greg. Too tired to touch his wife, but had time for adult films. Maybe if he wasn't glued to his laptop drooling over fake women, his wife wouldn't have cried to her best friend. How do you come back from that? You don't. I shut my phone off completely. Calls poured in constantly. Alicia, Richard, John, Susie, all desperate for me to pick up. Screw them. The only good news? No cops. Maybe Dominic was too embarrassed to press charges. Maybe he didn't want to admit he got knocked out by a guy dressed as a pirate. Either way, I didn't care. What stung the most? My friends. They texted, they left voicemails, but no one showed up. That's when I realized something. When people don't know what to say, they disappear. Not because they don't care, but because they're clueless on how to help. It was both a curse and a relief. With no distractions, my mind spiraled. The images of Alicia and Dominic replayed like a horror film on repeat. The only way to quiet it? Drink. Karen, the bartender, became my only constant. The hardest part about staying with my mom wasn't the lack of privacy or the weird feeling of stepping backward into my childhood. It was being away from my kids. Seeing them meant seeing Alicia, like knowing there was a warm bed waiting for me, but having to crawl through broken glass to get there. So I drank more, and I probably would have kept drinking if Karen hadn't shown me something one night at the bar. She slid her phone across the counter. You might want to see this. I glanced down. Caught Catwoman. At first the headline meant nothing, then I read the details. 2 Catwomen. A pirate. Damn Tarzan. Superman versus Hulk. My stomach dropped. I knew this story. That fool, I muttered. I grabbed my phone, powered it on, and punched in Richard's number. So what's next? Divorce, separation, or just knocking her out? Greg let out a dry chuckle, staring at his untouched plate. Why do I have to choose? He said it like a joke, but there was no humor in his voice. I could see it. His mind was stuck, replaying that night over and over, haunted by Alicia's words like a blade twisting in his gut. I hesitated before asking, look, this might be too personal and you can tell me to go to hell, but the adult films. What was she talking about? His face reddened. So what? I watch sometimes. Not every damn day. His tone sharpened. Like she doesn't? Like you don't? Of course I do, I shrugged. But she made it sound like you were choosing that over her. Was that true? His jaw tightened. Go to hell, Richard. I raised my hands in surrender. Just trying to understand. You two always seemed solid. I didn't see this coming. Greg sighed, dragging his fork in slow circles across his plate. She doesn't get it. Get what? He rubbed his face, frustration flickering in his eyes. I work 10, 12 hours a day. I handle everything. Investors, pissed off customers, HR nightmares, lawsuits. By the time I get home, I'm wiped. He paused, his voice lowering. And Alicia, she needs a lot of buildup. Takes 30 minutes just to get her in the mood. Then she wants different positions, dirty talk, constant engagement. And don't get me wrong, when I can, it's amazing. But I can't do that every night. Not after the kind of days I have. I leaned back, letting that sink in. Greg exhaled. I know I'm lucky. Most guys complain their wives barely want them. That's not my issue. But sometimes I just want to come home and not have to give more of myself. He looked at me. You get that? I nodded. Yeah, I get it. When I walk through that door, I don't want to be a boss or a husband or a dad. I just want to exist. I hesitated, then asked, before the party, how long had it been? He blinked, shaking his head. I don't even know, Rich. I didn't realize how long it had been. Understanding passed between us. Then I saw it. That flicker of anger in his eyes. But that doesn't excuse what she did, he said coldly. I didn't cheat. I didn't humiliate her. Why didn't she just talk to me? I sighed. Maybe for the same reason you never told her why you watched those movies. His gaze sharpened. Communication is hard, I said. Especially when you don't realize something needs to be said. His jaw tensed. How the hell do you tell your wife you're unhappy? You just say it, I answered. I'm unhappy, Greg scoffed. Like it's that easy. I smirked. Since we're clearing the air, about my wall. He rolled his eyes. Consider us even for that damn story. Idiot. I thought punching me in the face evened things out. Not even close. I laughed. For the first time in days, Greg actually looked like himself again. Then I caught movement at the doorway. Nikki. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something urgent in her eyes. I walked over. What's up? She leaned in, voice low. Alicia knows Greg's here. She's on her way. I froze. Freaking John, I muttered. He must have called her, probably to chew her out, and ended up giving away Greg's location. I rubbed my face. Nikki, stop her at the door. She held up her hands. No way. He's been running from this long enough. I clenched my jaw. She cheated on him, Nikki. Or did you forget? She folded her arms. Oh, I remember. There's a hole in my wall to prove it. I turned back to Greg. He was still absently pushing food around his plate, completely unaware of the storm heading his way. "What do you want me to do, Nikki?" Her expression softened. "You can be his friend. You can help him, but you can't shield him from this." She patted my chest. "This is his fight," I sighed, turning to break the news. Before I could, Greg spoke. "I heard you," he muttered, lifting his head. His face was unreadable. "You suck at whispering." His eyes met mine. "She's on her way." Greg rubbed his chin, wincing slightly, then let out a slow breath. Determination settled over his features as he finally pushed away from the table. "All right," he said, voice steady. His gaze locked onto mine. "I'm ready." Without another word, he stood up and walked straight out the back door. The sky was ablaze with deep oranges and reds, stretching endlessly across the horizon. It was the kind of sunset that could make a person forget their troubles, if only for a moment. For a split second, I let myself absorb it. Then her voice shattered the stillness. "Greg? Baby?" And just like that, the moment was gone. I didn't turn, didn't acknowledge her, just kept my eyes on the fading light. Alicia hesitated, then sat beside me on Richard's back porch, pulling her knees to her chest like a child seeking comfort. "I've been looking everywhere for you," she murmured. "Wrong move." I barely whispered my response, the same words I had said the night I caught her whispering with Dominic in the kitchen. "I was in the same place all night." She stiffened, inhaling sharply. "Greg, we need to talk." I nodded, but still refused to look at her. Even in my peripheral vision, I could see the evidence of her guilt. Swollen eyes, tear-streaked cheeks, the weight of regret pressing down on her. "I love you." I shook my head. "Don't say that." "Greg, please." "No," I snapped. "You don't get to say you love me after humiliating me like that. You turned our marriage into a public joke. I would never have done that to you." She flinched, but recovered quickly. "You did this," she said, her voice rising. "You stormed downstairs like a madman and made sure everyone knew. You could have pulled me aside, waited until we were alone, but no. You turned it into a damn spectacle." I clenched my jaw. She wasn't entirely wrong. I'd acted on instinct, blinded by rage. I exhaled slowly. "Fine, I'll own that. But I didn't start this, Alicia. Your boyfriend did. He made sure I knew exactly what you'd done." Her breath hitched. "I reacted the only way I knew how," I continued, my voice low, controlled. "Could I have handled it differently? Maybe. But I didn't betray you. I didn't let someone else rub my infidelity in your face." I finally turned to look at her. The anger drained from her expression, replaced by something heavier. Regret. "I know, Greg," she whispered. I shook my head. "Do you, though?" Her face hardened, something reigniting in her. "You may not have cheated, Greg, but you weren't there for me," she said, voice trembling. "Do you remember my birthday? The night I dressed up for you? Spent an hour getting ready. Lotion, perfume, hair, everything?" She swallowed hard. "Do you?" I did. That was the night I fired Frank, my assistant manager, a guy I had trusted, only to find out he had been sleeping with a subordinate. I'd vouched for him, defended him, and in the end, I was the one left cleaning up the mess. By the time I got home, I was drained. But I hadn't forgotten her birthday. I made dinner reservations. I had plans. Only, that wasn't what she had wanted that night. "We went to dinner," I said carefully, "and we were together afterward." She let out a hollow laugh. "We had sex, Greg. There's a difference." Her voice cracked. "You barely touched me. And when I tried to hold you afterward, you turned away and said you were tired." I stayed silent. "I gave you space," she continued. "But when I woke up in the middle of the night, you weren't in bed." Her voice wavered. "I went looking for you." I knew what she was going to say. "You were watching adult films," she whispered. "Sitting there in the dark, getting off to strangers while I was alone in our bed." The words hit like a gut punch. And then she broke. Her shoulders shook, her breath hitching, but she didn't hold back the sobs this time. I just sat there. Something inside me shifted. Until now, Alicia had been the villain, the cheater, the liar, the one who had ruined everything. Now I wasn't so sure. "I get it," I said finally, my voice quiet. "I took you for granted." Her red-rimmed eyes snapped to mine. "Do you? Do you really?" she asked, her voice raw with emotion. "Do you know how much that night broke me? How it felt to give everything, only to realize I wasn't enough?" Her hands clenched into fists. "I don't think you do." Silence. "After that, I stopped asking for you. she continued. I told myself I wouldn't beg. If you wanted me, you'd come to me. And you waited. She nodded. And you never did. So you slept with Dominic, I said, voice flat. Because he made you feel wanted. She wiped at her face. Yes, him and Susie. I tensed. Both? She exhaled slowly. Susie and I had a moment in high school. We were drunk. It happened. We blamed the booze and never talked about it again. A sinking feeling churned in my stomach. Years later, I went to her house crying, she admitted, feeling worthless. I told her I needed to drink. Her breathing turned uneven. So we drank. The pain dulled, but didn't disappear. How did that lead to you sleeping with both of them? I asked, my voice eerily calm. She swallowed hard. Dominic came home, found us drunk. Susie told him how I felt, how I thought I was invisible to you. He started saying how beautiful I was, how sexy. Susie agreed. Her tone was detached now, like she was telling someone else's story. The old high school thing came up, she said, and Dominic got excited. He told us to kiss. I clenched my jaw. We were drunk, so we did. At first it was a joke, but then we kept going. And when I finally pulled away, Dominic was there. He leaned in and I didn't stop him. She exhaled shakily. From there, everything escalated. I forced myself to stay still. How many times? She turned her gaze to the sky as if looking for an answer in the stars. Twice. It stung. The first time, a drunken mistake, was bad enough, but the fact that she had gone back? That was something else entirely. I swallowed down the rising nausea. At the party in the kitchen, I asked, my voice devoid of emotion, what were you and Dominic talking about? Her expression darkened. Guilt? Anger? He was drunk, she admitted. He told me how good I looked, that he wanted me to come over later, to pick up where we left off. My fists curled. I tried to shut him down, she continued. I told him it was a mistake, that we couldn't do this again. She hesitated. Then he started getting handsy. And that's when I walked over? She nodded. Yes. I exhaled slowly. And that's when you folded your guilt into a neat little excuse. Her jaw tightened. I was angry, Greg. Seeing Dominic act like that reminded me of how you made me feel. Were you going to go? I asked coldly. Since he appreciated you so much? Her head snapped up. No, she held my gaze, voice raw. I was hoping you'd finally ask me. Something inside me fractured. Alicia's voice was barely above a whisper. I chose the Catwoman costume because I knew you loved Michelle Pfeiffer in Batman Returns. She swallowed hard. You once told me you fell for her because of that suit. I saw the way you looked at me in it. Her breath hitched. For the first time in forever, I felt desirable again. I almost skipped the party, Greg. I thought maybe, finally, you'd see me the way you used to. I inhaled sharply, bracing myself. I was hoping that when we got home, you'd take me, she continued. Then Dominic happened. She spat his name like poison. I shook my head. None of this would have happened if you hadn't slept with him to begin with. Why didn't you just talk to me, Alicia? Her gaze dropped to the floor. I don't know, she murmured. I really don't. A humorless chuckle escaped me. Plenty of blame to go around, huh? She turned to me, eyes full of fragile hope. So, what now? I heard the desperation in her voice. Greg, I don't want to lose you. I love you. I would do anything to fix this. My mind raced. Could I forgive her? Could we ever move past this? I exhaled. I don't know, Alicia. It would take a lot. Hope flickered brighter in her expression. I'll do whatever it takes, she whispered, gripping my hand. Just give me a chance. I studied her face, wanting to believe her. Maybe, just maybe, we could repair what was broken. All right, I said slowly, but there are conditions. First, we need counseling. Non-negotiable. We have to learn how to communicate. She nodded eagerly. Yes, anything. Second, I continued, you have to cut ties with Susie. The light in her eyes dimmed. Her grip on my hand loosened. What? You can't be friends with Susie anymore, I repeated, firm but calm. Her expression twisted in confusion and disbelief. Greg, why would you ask me that? I exhaled through my nose, my patience thinning. Are you serious? Her hands trembled. Alicia, you didn't just cheat on me. You did it with her and her husband. How am I supposed to heal if you keep them in your life? Every time I see you with her, I'll wonder if it's happening again. You're asking me to rebuild trust while keeping the source of the betrayal within arm's reach." She flinched like I had struck her. Tears welled in her eyes. "You're making me choose between my best friend and my husband?" I clenched my jaw. "Yeah, Alicia, I am." She shook her head, her voice breaking. I can't do that, Greg. Please don't make me." And just like that, something inside me shattered completely. Strangely, this hurt more than the cheating itself. No anger to mask the pain. No blind rage to dull the ache. Just cold, crushing clarity. I wasn't enough. Not completely. She loved me, but she loved Susie too. And she wouldn't, or maybe couldn't choose. Dominic had never been the real problem. He was just the symptom. This was the disease. I exhaled slowly, my voice hollow. "Then we're done." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she stared at me, searching for some way to change my mind. She didn't answer. And that told me everything I needed to know. Less than a year later, we were divorced. It took that long because Alicia fought it with everything she had. She begged, pleaded, humiliated herself. She showed up at my job, breaking down in front of my coworkers, begging me not to leave. For a second, I almost wavered, but I couldn't. As long as she refused to let go of Susie, I knew I'd never fully have her. I'd always be sharing her heart. And no marriage, no love, can survive that. A year later, the wounds are still raw. There were no winners. Greg and Alicia do their best to co-parent, keeping things civil for the kids. As for me, I've lost track of how many nights I've been Greg's sounding board. But this Halloween, there was a silver lining. He showed up with a date. No Catwoman costume in sight. Maybe she's just a rebound. Maybe she's something more. Either way, it's progress. Healing doesn't happen overnight. Love doesn't just disappear. But moving forward, that happens one step at a time.
Story 4.
My parents promised a family vacation for my birthday, but left without me, leaving my sister to humiliate me and ruin my day. Here's how I got back at them. So 3 days ago, I celebrated my 15th birthday, but things didn't exactly go according to plan. On the morning of my birthday, my parents came up to me very happily and told me that, to surprise me on my birthday, they had arranged for a family trip to the Ponos. I was super excited. Being the less important younger sibling, I don't usually get surprises like this, and I was really happy. However, a couple of hours later, after I was done packing and went down with my bags to leave with my family, I saw that my parents were already out, and it was just my older sister, Alex, 17 female, who was waiting for me downstairs. She is the golden child, the one who can always get our parents to do exactly what she wants, and this time, it was no different. She seemed very happy, so I instantly knew there was something wrong. When I asked her what was going on, she told me that there was no need for me to pack my bags and that I could go up and unpack. At first, I thought the trip had been canceled altogether, but then she told me that there would be no family vacation for me and handed me a piece of paper with a list of chores written on it. I was very confused, and then she told me that my parents and she had decided that even though they had surprised me with the vacation in the morning, they had a discussion about this. And Alex thinks that because we have our finals coming up in a couple of weeks, it would be much better for me to stay at home and try to study. But she gets to go because she's already done with everything. In the meantime, if I started getting bored without my family while they were away in the Ponos, I could start working on these tasks that needed to be done around the house. Then she laughed and said that instead of looking upset, I should really be thanking her because she had bought me some time to study and prepare for my finals, rather than waste my time frolicking outside with my family. I was so hurt that I couldn't even bring myself to say anything except ask where our parents were, and she told me that she was the one who had already sent them off to the airport and stayed back so she could deliver this to me in person because that was her birthday gift to me. She said that my parents wanted to make sure they were not giving me false hopes, but Alex had brought up my finals, which were going to be held in a couple of weeks, just after they had surprised us both with the news of the trip, and so they couldn't ignore it, and they thought that this was for the best. They had apparently let Alex tell me about this because they couldn't bring themselves to break my heart, and I knew for a fact that Alex loved and relished the opportunity to humiliate me like that. So, I resisted the urge to start crying in front of her and went back upstairs with my bags. I waited until I heard the front door shut, and then I finally broke down and cried for an entire hour. Alex has always hated me, and I've known that. I've also always known that my parents will just do whatever she says without thinking much because, to them, her word is the holy grail. But I couldn't even imagine that they would do something so cruel and humiliating to me on my birthday of all days. Alex and I have had our fair share of fights before, and my parents have always taken her side, but this was unimaginable. On the morning of my birthday, after my parents had told me about the surprise trip, I even texted my friends and told them that I wouldn't be able to hang out with them in the evening, as I had planned on doing. And even they had been pretty surprised that my parents had arranged something like this for me. I guess some things are genuinely too good to be true. But I was still pissed after I stopped crying, and the more I thought about my situation, the worse I felt. So I decided to do something that I knew would piss my parents and Alex off greatly to get back at them. Since I was home by myself, I decided to go into my dad's office and make a bunch of phone calls from my phone to all the important contacts that I found on my dad's MacBook. I invited them to a party in the evening that I had arranged for my parents' anniversary, and I wanted to surprise them. So I know it was a bit of a last-minute invitation, but I told everyone that I would be really grateful if they were able to show up. And since I'm just a kid, most of his business associates agreed to attend this party that I was throwing. I did the same for my mother as well. Neither of them had password-protected devices and had made the stupid decision of leaving them all at home, so it was a piece of cake for me. Then I decided to text Alex's boyfriend on Instagram and told him the same thing and invited him in the evening. I also invited my own friends and had them help me set up the house to make it look like a party. Finally, around 7 in the evening, the guests that I had invited started showing up. But they were really shocked to see that my parents were nowhere to be found. I kept telling them that it was a surprise for the evening so they would be able to find out what was going on in due course. Then, once all the guests had arrived and I had taken a group photo with all of them, I decided to put my plan into action and told them exactly where my parents were. I told them all about the way that I had been treated and how my parents always seemed to think that whatever Alex said was what should be followed, and I was basically Cinderella. But I had never spoken up about any of this until today. I then explained to them what exactly had happened on the day of my birthday, and how my parents just abandoned me and didn't even bother to explain things to me in person. All because Alex thought it was the right thing to do. I saw that a lot of people were extremely shocked since my parents put up a really good act in front of other people of being nice and decent people. But I can tell you for a fact that good people don't do stuff like this to their own kids. Anyway, once I was done telling them all about what happened, I told them that this was exactly why I had thrown this party, so I could expose my parents and my sister. If I hadn't screwed things up for the three of them badly enough, I also decided to show them all the list of chores that Alex had left for me, and I could see that her boyfriend, who was standing in a corner of the room, did not have any idea that Alex had this cruel and inhuman streak in her as well. Everyone was quiet after I spoke up and shared what had happened with me. And eventually, I think people realized that there was no point in staying any longer. Some of them left without a word, and some of them bothered to come up to me, console me, and then left. The only thing I felt bad about was that I had wasted their time, but I wouldn't worry too much about it. After they all left, I decided to send the group photo that I had clicked with everybody who had attended the party and sent it to my parents and my sister with a caption that said, "Had some guests over for my birthday party today. I think we're going to finally get started on the list that Alex left me." It was the perfect plan. After I sent that message, they responded within seconds, telling me to fix whatever I had done right now and that they were coming back home on the next flight. I blocked all of them and went to my best friend Fiona's house with my bags because I knew that that was not my home anymore. Fiona and her parents are really sweet people who always used to tell me that their doors would always be open for me, and I finally decided to take them up on their offer and move in with them. I don't know how long they're going to be able to support me, but for now, this is all that I have, and I'm very grateful to them for opening up their home to me so graciously. Anyway, on the day of my birthday, I didn't hear anything from my parents, but the next day, they came to Fiona's house. I guess nobody was surprised that I had chosen to stay with Fiona because they knew that she and I had been the best of friends since we were really little. When they came by, her parents refused to let them in, and said that they had no business trying to talk to me when I had made it very clear that I was not interested in speaking to them about anything. But my parents started threatening to take legal steps against Fiona's parents, and I got kind of scared, so I told them to let them in and I would be ready to talk to them. They were furious with me and said that no matter what they had done, I still had no right to involve their business associates in this, because now their entire reputation was in ruins, and none of their CO workers and associates were willing to even speak to them. Some of them had even blocked my mom and dad, and they were blaming me for all of this, which I think is fair because I did orchestrate this entire thing. But I also told them that if they had just shown me a bit of kindness and not utterly humiliated me by pulling that stunt on my birthday, I wouldn't have done any of this. I ended up shouting at them for always treating me badly in comparison to Alex, and said that she, along with my parents, had ruined my life, and I was never going to forgive them for that. Things got really heated, and all of us were yelling at each other so much that Fiona's parents had to intervene, and Fiona had to take me out of the room to calm me down. When I had finally calmed down, her parents came to me and said that my parents had left, and they were going to make sure that they never got to speak to me until I was ready to come face to face with them. Then they suggested that I should really consider a legal recourse like emancipation from my parents, because it had become increasingly obvious that they couldn't care about me any less, and it was time that I cut them out of my life for good. After discussing this with Fiona's parents, I decided to speak to a lawyer, and we are now considering emancipation. I'm still very confused about it because this is a huge decision to make, and I don't want to regret anything in the future, but honestly, at the rate that things are going, I don't think I will. Yesterday, my parents got in touch with me again, against my will. Last evening, I received an email, and I knew from the address that it was from my parents, so I tried really hard not to open it. But curiosity got the better of me, and I ended up reading it. They had essentially started off by telling me that the reason they had even surprised me with that trip was because one of my father's clients had opened up a new spa and resort in the Ponos, and this was a perk for my dad and the family. He just decided to utilize this opportunity around the same time as my birthday, but when Alex brought up my finals, since they didn't want my grades to slip later on, only because I had taken a vacation with them just a couple of weeks before my exams, they couldn't believe that I had misconstrued it as something ugly and tried to get revenge on them for it. It just made them feel like that they had not raised me right. Alex herself was upset, and she only wanted to be a good, concerned big sister to me, so there was no need for me to overreact the way that I had. It was all a bunch of baloney, and I was really annoyed, so I almost stopped reading the email halfway through. But then the next half was all about how upset they were that I had involved other people in our family drama, and aired our dirty linen in public, because this was something that they had never wanted or even expected to happen. They said that regardless of how many fights we had had, I had never come up to them and told them directly exactly what issues I was having with my parents, so they were never able to work on it. They claimed that if I had just spoken to them once and discussed my feelings with them, then they might have been able to make things right with me. But instead, I had taken such a drastic step. They said that the list of chores that Alex had left with me was a tad bit too much, but even then, I should have called them up later on and confronted them about it. And they would have come back immediately if they knew that I was feeling left out and neglected. However, the way that I had chosen to deal with the situation was really unexpected, and they felt bad about everything because apparently they genuinely didn't want to hurt me. And this was just an unfortunate misunderstanding blown out of proportion. They want me to talk to them and sort things out, but I don't know what I want to do right now. I'm having very mixed feelings about this, so please help me out. AITA for throwing a party and exposing my parents amongst all their CO workers and business associates after they left me out while they went on vacation. Update 1. Okay, so most of you think that what I did was completely fine and they deserved it, and that there is nothing that I have to apologize for. So I have decided that I'm not going to apologize. I blocked the email address that they sent that email to me from so they wouldn't be able to contact me another time. I know that they can just make another one and keep trying to text me, but I'll just keep blocking them, and I have made up my mind now. Whatever they try to say to me, I'm just not going to respond to it or even try to read it. It's just not worth it. All it's going to do is mess me up in the head even more. As for emancipation, I have decided that I'm going through with it. It's a huge deal, and I know that I'm still too young, but Fiona and her parents have reassured me that no matter what happens, they are going to be by my side, and I have nothing to worry about. They have told me that they can even legally adopt me if that's going to make me feel less nervous, and I actually think that it might, but I haven't thought about that yet. Right now, we are only focusing on the emancipation, and we have spoken to a lawyer, and the paperwork is being processed at the moment. I truly don't know how my parents are going to react to it because when they sent me that email, I could tell that they were not happy about the fact that I'm choosing to live with Fiona and her parents as of now. Which doesn't even make sense to me because from the way that I have been treated my entire life, it has become very obvious to me that they really don't want me that much. At least, they don't want me in their home as much as they want Alex around them. That's very obvious to me, and yet they are still trying to reach out to me, and that was just very confusing for me. I have a feeling that they only wanted to get me back because they wanted to fix their reputation and their image, nothing else. I'm just very confused. At the moment, right now, all I can do is wait for them to receive the paperwork and see how they react to it. It's been a couple of days since my post, and they have not tried to reach out to me again after that email, so I don't know what they're feeling at the moment. I know that things cannot be good for them either because there were a bunch of people at the party that I had invited, and I've been hearing from people that Alex and her boyfriend broke up. But nobody knows the reason except for me, of course. Update 2. Hi guys. So, a couple of days back, my parents finally were served with the paperwork for my legal emancipation, and they were not happy about it, which was quite surprising for me. They called up Fiona's parents, and there was a huge fight since apparently they believed that Fiona and her parents had put me up to this and were controlling me. They did not think that I was doing this of my own will, which didn't make sense to me because, do they realize how badly they've treated me in the past? Of course, I was doing this of my own free will. Nobody even had to force me to think twice. I had sort of started anticipating this kind of reaction out of them after I had posted my last update since a lot of you had told me that they were doing exactly what I thought they were doing. They only wanted me back so that they could show everyone that we were a happy family, and whatever I had said at the party was just me being bratty. But I did not go back to them, and that's what really pissed them off, the fact that I'm finally standing up to them. They cannot take that. Well, too bad, because it's happening. They can call Fiona's parents all the names that they want, but it's not going to change the fact that they deserve this. They do not deserve to be my parents. And now I'm finally going to be free from them. I couldn't overhear much. But Fiona told me that apparently my parents had called her parents every name in the book that they could think of, and had said that they were going to fight them and take this to court if it was necessary because they had no right to put me up to all of this nonsense and they were not going to tolerate it. They were pretty pissed off and had even threatened to hurt them, which I thought was crazy because I hope they realize it's not legal and it's just going to make them come off worse. The way they had spoken to Fiona's parents about me just kind of reiterated what I already believed about them. They did not want me back because they thought of me as a daughter whom they loved, but more because they wanted to fix their image in front of other people. Not once had they said that they wanted to speak to me or they wanted me back. They just kept saying that they knew Fiona's parents wanted to ruin their reputation by acting like the saviors for me and trying to show the world that I had been mistreated in my own home, which is why I had come to them. But they were not going to allow it to happen. Apparently, they had been yelling on the phone about how I had been an entitled, spoiled brat, and the fact that Fiona and her parents were supporting it only meant that they were not the ones who were fit to be parents. I'm pretty sure if they actually loved me like a daughter, they would have been more concerned about my well-being and would have tried to talk to me rather than yell at Fiona's parents and imply that they were trying to ruin my parents' reputation. Why would they even want to do that? Fiona's parents have not known my parents for long. They have only known each other through the two of us, so there's no reason for them to be competing against them. It's not like there's any competition anyway, since Fiona's parents are a lot more successful in life, and are also much kinder and more compassionate. But my parents are so concerned about their so-called image that they think Fiona's parents are just like them, and are incapable of thinking about me, and are just trying to pull them down. I so desperately want to tell my parents that they are not pretending to be my saviors by trying to help me out here, but they actually are my saviors because it is them that I needed saving from. And if they had just understood that in the first place, they would have been sorry for everything that they had done instead of trying to stir up even more drama. But Fiona and her parents have given me strict instructions not to reach out to them, no matter how tempted I feel, because it's just not worth it. And I know that they got the phone call from my parents a couple of days ago, and after fighting with them on the phone call and giving me only the details that they thought were necessary for me to know. They told me that they had recorded the phone call, and my parents were really stupid because they could use it as evidence for why I deserved to be emancipated from them. They also told me that they wanted me to think about whether I wanted them to legally adopt me or not, and I ended up saying yes since I really like them. And I also know that this is going to piss my parents off even more. But that's not really the reason. It's mostly because I genuinely feel like they are extremely kind-hearted and lovely human beings. Having Fiona as my sister is going to be a bonus, so I'm all in. They have told me that they are going to speak to the lawyer once more to start the paperwork for that as well, since it might also help with my emancipation case, knowing that I have better people to rely on and live with. Honestly, this just keeps getting better, and I couldn't have been more grateful to them. Update 3. Hi, something terrible happened today. Long story short, Alex beat the crap out of me after school today. My last class, English, was being held in the east wing of the school, and when I was out of class, she and a bunch of her friends literally cornered me. I am, unfortunately, always the last person to leave class because I'm very slow at packing my things, and by the time I exited the classroom, most people had already left. When I saw Alex and her friends standing outside, I felt a bit intimidated, but I didn't let it show because that would only make them win. Anyway, when I started to leave the classroom, they got all up in my face and said that I was not allowed to leave. Then they made everyone else who was loitering in the class get out and told me that they had some chores to settle with me. I tried to square up to them and keep a level head so that the fear wouldn't show on my face, but they didn't seem to care. Alex grabbed my arm and walked with me outside while I yelled at her to let me go, but everyone else was loud as well, and nobody else could hear me. Then they took me to the janitor's closet and locked me inside after shoving me in forcefully. I kept banging on the door, but they were standing outside, and I think even if people heard me, they wouldn't dare to do anything because Alex and her friends are in the senior-most classes and have a nasty rep. After putting me in there for almost 5 minutes, Alex allowed me to come out, and by then, pretty much everyone in that wing of the school had cleared out, and it was just me against them. That's when the first slap landed on my face, and she started screaming at me. She called me selfish and said that I was ungrateful to our parents, and then came the real reason why she was so pissed. She started accusing me of being the reason her boyfriend had broken up with her. Then she slammed my head against the concrete, and that's when I started feeling really dizzy. So she took advantage of that, and just kept pounding me with her fists while her friends watched and laughed. It was extremely painful, and I tried to defend myself. But Alex was several inches taller than me and much heavier, so there was not much that I could do. At one point, I literally started cowering against the wall, and she still continued to beat me. Once she felt satisfied, she kicked me one last time, and then she and her friends left while I cried against the wall. About 15 minutes later, Fiona finally found me sitting on the floor crying really badly. When I told her what had happened, she helped me get up, and instead of walking home together, we decided to take a cab back home because I was in no condition to walk. Once we got home, I told her parents everything, and they looked pretty grim, so they contacted the school immediately and then the police. It's been only an hour since then, and they have been talking on the phone ever since, so they are pretty busy, but Fiona is taking care of me since I'm pretty banged up. The bruises are just starting to show up and everything hurts, but I know that Alex will get her karma for this, and she'll get it pretty soon. Update 4. So there are a lot of things I want to talk about, and I will just try to keep it short and sweet. Last week, Alex beat me up, and thankfully, the school stood up for me and shared the security footage from that wing of the building with the police, so it was pretty easy to charge her with a misdemeanor. She got community service to make up for it. But the best part is that she got suspended for the next 6 weeks as well. And that means that she won't be able to attend prom, something that she had been really looking forward to. She will also not be able to sit for her finals with the rest of her class. She will have to be seated separately, and that means that she can't cheat her way out of it. I think it's well-deserved, and I felt quite vindicated when Fiona told me about all of this. Another great thing that happened was after the whole debacle with Alex, my parents decided to give up my rights. That's right, they terminated their parental rights over me, and the paperwork has been signed and everything, so I'm finally free. Fiona's parents are in the process of legally adopting me, so I couldn't be more grateful to them for that. My parents said that after everything that had happened, they don't want me in their family anymore, and I know that they are going to try and make it seem like I'm the one at fault. But I don't think anybody's going to buy that, so they can try their best. It doesn't matter to me anyway. To be honest, I'm finally part of a happy family now, and I can vouch for the fact that my new sister and parents are going to be far better than the ones I originally had. I really can't believe that things are finally working out for me, and this is probably the happiest that I have felt in a really long time. So much so that I had actually forgotten about my finals coming up. But now Fiona and I are going to crack on, and we are going to show everyone what I'm made of.